Unfortunately, some of the media didn't quite take that same read of the report, but again, I think when you think about audit reports, they don't put in positive things. That's not the way that they write. The report did suggest that there was other ways that we could look at benchmarking our loan portfolio, and absolutely think that there's many ways that we could measure our loan portfolio, and we can look at a lot of different collection rates. So I'd like to have Jake maybe talk through the rating system that we use, why we use it, and what we're hoping to use it for.
So the couple things I wanted to point out. One, this should have been everyone, and what this is a breakdown of the loans that are called out specifically in the audit. So it talks about ones that repaid, were forgiven, referred to DOA, or amended. And while this isn't new information, these would have all been on the quarterly reports that I am already providing to you. I wanted to make sure I did a breakout specifically of the ones that they're talking about in the audit, so you can kind of see the breakdown on those. So loans amended, you can see, I've got date awarded, so that would be the date the contract was signed on each of these. TVF and TDFs are technology venture funds and technology development funds. So you can see on the loans amended, 8 out of the 10 of them were in fact technology startup companies, as Stephanie alluded to, wanting to work as much as we can with startups to make sure they're successful. The next page is the refer to DOA, so you can see the breakdown of those. It's just 3 loans we're talking about, and 2 out of those 3 were Flambeau River. And for those of you who are familiar with it, that rescue of a paper mill in northern Wisconsin that entailed a number of different legislative awards, legislative grants, some legislative loans where Commerce was directed to provide to this company to keep administration. We had a number of meetings, Secretary Hitch was there, as well as a number of WEDC people, and really the decision to refer all the loans over to DOA was so they could work a repayment plan with Flambeau. So rather than us having some loans on our books, some on their books, we felt the best approach was to have all the loans in one and allow for a comprehensive collection plan to come out of that. So next one is the loans forgiven. This is for 3 out of 4 of them, actually an extremely positive story. Kettle, Regal, all met their requirements, so the job requirements that were set out in their contract back in 2005 and 2006 when those were awarded, allowing them to have forgiveness if they met all the job creation and capital investments that they said that they would. Those 3 did do that. Food processing technology loan that was written under the oath for forgiveness. It's not something we do in our current WEDC contracts, but that is something that was common in the Commerce technology loans. So is the reason for the forgiveness ones, and then the last one is a listing of the ones that were repaid. Both on the first one and this last one, you can see some highlighted yellow. There were some small inaccuracies with the LAB report, so I just kind of highlight why our numbers that we're showing you here today are different than LAB's. It appears that they made some miscalculations in their audit, so I wanted to highlight those. So those are the loans that are repaid. And like Stephanie said, overall, I think it's pretty good news on that front. Yeah.
And just so we're clear, all of these, for the loan amended, referred to Department Administration, or loans forgiven, unless my eyes are getting spotty, the loans that were made before the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation,
yep, that's correct? The only 2 loans that are any of these 4 pages are the 2 WEDC loans that are on the repaid.
And those are ones that are repaid?
Yep.
But everything Commerce?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yep.
I would just like to compliment you detailed together, because I think that's an important component of the story for the board to understand.
Absolutely.
And this, when you referred to this, you said this was what was referred to in the report, that this is the 7.7 million?
Yeah, so
approximately?
yep, exactly. So
Okay.
they refer to the 7.7 million, of which 6.6 was deferred, charged off, or amended. This is a complete breakdown of every single one of those loans.
Okay.
It's called up there.
And the forgiven loans, I mean, that's the other thing that I think there was some misunderstanding about from what I read and some conversations I had. Those are positive
stories.
and they're lumped in with things, and at least some of the things I read, they were lumped in with delinquency and and issues with either having to amend a loan or maybe refer to DO. And it's apples and oranges because the forgiven loans are the success stories.
Exactly.
Okay.
So then on to the topic that Stephanie was talking about, oh, sorry.
Did you have a question there?
Well, no, well, why don't you finish your report first? and I can-
Oh,
yeah.
okay, so the other one that Stephanie had said that I would touch on is the recommendation in there about our delinquency rate. So as a lot of you I'm sure are aware, you can calculate delinquency in a variety of different ways. And we have a metric that we chose to do. We look at a number of different delinquencies, whether it's number of loans delinquent, delinquency by loan type or portfolio. The report I provide to you guys on a quarterly basis lists out all the principal balance that's delinquent for each of our loans. And then another metric is our payment delinquency rate. That I refer to most often as being 2.7%. That's called out in this audit report. So every one of those is a valid metric to measure our loan delinquency by. So I think what the LAB report is calling out is that they would like to see us develop a goal or a metric in more than just one area, which will work here now that we have 3 years of history with our loan portfolio as WEDC. We can evaluate a lot more metrics within our loan portfolio. And so we'll work with the Awards Administration Committee to develop other metrics that you guys would like to see on our loan portfolio. You know, the metric that they call out in the report of principal delinquency, had that been the one that we advertise on a regular basis, the delinquency rate would have actually dropped from 25.1% to 8.8%. You know, versus the one that I'm reporting to you guys that shows a drop from 6.5 to 7. So both metrics show tremendous progress that's been made over the last year in our loan portfolio. It's just a matter of, you know, which one the committee or the board finds most useful. Yeah.
Well, I have a question. Pre-WEDC, what was the metric utilized to measure the activity and the loan portfolio for Department of Commerce?
And I've never found a metric that as far as I have ever found, I don't know that one prior to.
So that's positive as well.
Yeah.
It's also important, isn't it, that the loans that are being made here, these are loans that can't be gotten at a bank. I mean, these are, the risk of this portfolio is substantially higher, right, than would be a standard bank or anywhere else, or even a credit card company. So I did have a question. What was the primary reason for the drop in the rate of delinquency? Was it just collect?
It's a combination. So as these 4 pages show you, that it really is a combination of all 4. You know, we did refer some to DOA, we did charge some off, we did amend some, and we received payments on some. So it's a combination of all 4. I think the important thing is the strides we've taken in our proactive approach. You know, if you think back to the audit from a year and a half ago, and that was really what their criticism was, is that we didn't have good enough controls. We weren't on top of it as much as maybe we should have been. And really what this one is showing is that's gone. We are on top of all this now. And so whether it's proactively reaching out to businesses to get a payment, proactively reaching out to a business to find out what an affordable payment is, that we increase our likelihood of getting repaid, or proactively taking a look at it and say, yeah, this one's not going to work out. We need to start legal collections on it. You know, they're different, but in the same aspect, they're the same, that we're being more proactive overall on it.
So just one other comment. Page loans amended. I hope we will retain, even though these are all commerce, I hope we'll retain for the tech venture fund loans and those kinds of things a lot of flexibility. You look at Epic, all the businesses that are spinning off of Epic right now, and those are high-risk businesses initially. They may come to us for help, and that's help they can't get from a bank or something. We need to take risks on those kinds of companies because they're high-paying wages, and that's the future, let's face it. I mean, we have a strong manufacturing industry, but we also want a strong technology industry. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as Stephanie said before, we take amendments seriously. You know, it's not just check the box and it's done. I mean, they submit up-to-date financials with us. They submit up-to-date progress reports with us. We analyze and talk to them about what's your plan. We're going to amend this, but you know, if we're going to defer payments for a year, why do you think you're going to be able to make a payment to us in a year from now? And we monitor, are they continuing on with their commercialization efforts? Are they out seeking additional rounds of equity? You know, are they still in the product development phase, and it's gonna take a little bit more time. So we've discussed all of that, and as we pointed out on a number of different occasions, our amendments go through the exact same process that an award does on the approval up front. You know, it comes in a request from the field to, can you look at amending my loan? It goes into a review group, it goes to management review committee, and then if the award so warrants it, it's gonna go to the awards administration committee, or it's gonna come to the full board for approval before it gets done, so.
Can we say, imagine that our progress will slow in our loan failure rate now, though? I mean, we've made great strides from a year ago to now. We went from 6 to 2.4. We could not expect us to go to.
I know.
Whatever number you want to say, no.
I'm hoping the board likes the level that we're at now and within reason thinks that this is a good level. I don't know how much more there is to come down from where we're currently at.
But what I'm saying is that we are now current. We
Yeah,
have gotten to the point of where we want to be. If we can maintain ourselves at this point through our process, we've essentially achieved our goal.
Yep, and we'll continue to report, you know, quarterly. Administration committee sees every charge off that we do gets taken to the awards administration about, and then of course that is also listed on my provided to the board too.
So the before was, you know, Representative Kirkman was quoted, and typically the way this works, she's co-chair of the committee, along with Paul's, and the way, you know, I chaired the audit committee twice. It's one of my favorite committees. You try to get the best bang for the buck is sort of the idea behind it. And typically what happens by the auditors, you know, before the audit's even released. And so obviously usually coming from the auditors themselves. And so what she was quoted as saying is that, and this is the part I'm honestly not completely clear on how this is working. I see Secretary Hipsch is here, so he could probably add some clarity too. But she would say that I'm concerned that the bulk of the reduction in potentially uncollectible loan balances is not due to collection efforts, but rather from shifting past due loans to the Department of Administration and amending loan contracts to defer repayment. So I'm not clear on that mix. Now, clearly, we made progress. I think the board could feel proud. We brought in the Banking Association, and they kind of group, and I think, Jake, you've done a good job at getting sort of a system to track these better, and I compliment you for that. But the part that I'm not clear on is on this particular element, just in terms of these charge-offs being referred over to DOA, and I'm just not clear how that process works, and if she's accurate here, that's at least a portion of how this is worked due to strictly, you know, better collections, or what the story is. Maybe can you add some clarity to that?
Sure, well, I talked about the ones referred to DOA, that was part of a joint decision to get loans, both ones that were delinquent from Flambeau, all into one spot so they could work out a comprehensive repayment plan.
Mm-hmm.
And Jake, they're being repaid. I mean, that's from
Yeah.
a taxpayer perspective. They're not on our books anymore, but they're still on the state's books, and
Yeah.
there's still payments being made to the state.
Right, but I mean, is she right that, you know, because the impression you get in reading the co-chair's statement here is that somehow you know, that's going off of our books and onto their books, so then our books aren't exactly fully reflecting where we're at, and I just don't know. I honestly don't. I'm trying to
Well, our books, I mean,
understand that.
what our books are right here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the three that the Department of Commerce made under Jim Doyle, that Paul's point earlier, we've talked about Flambeau River biofuels before, and I've actually defended Governor Doyle's administration for that, saying, you know, when Representative Williams had Jim Doyle's Commerce Department not made those loans, you'd have hundreds, if not thousands, of people out of work.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not WDC's. I mean, those were probably a pretty risky loan to make in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Had they not made that loan, it's all but certain, I think any of the lawmakers in that area, Democrat or Republican, would tell you there'd be not just the people at that place out of work, there'd probably be hundreds of others related to it that were out of work. And so, to Paul's point earlier, I think the question isn't, that's why I ask about, just saying, are they loans or are they commerce loans? All the ones that are DOA, all the ones that had to be amended, and all the ones that are on this third page that were loans forgiven are all commerce loans under the previous administration. That's just statement of fact. I'm not editorializing it because I think in a number of those instances, they had no choice. But in terms of looking ahead, I think that goes to part of the awards committees to saying, when you make those decisions, not just about what to do with existing loans, but when you make decisions about granting awards in the first place, we've got to balance both the need to say, not only will we get this paid back, but in what time frame, combined with what's the alternative. And in this case, I don't know who, I think Secretary was Leininger at that time, in Commerce said, if we don't do this, we know this business is gone. And so, the team or the staff here is kind of stuck with saying, okay, that's how that loan was set up. We didn't have anything to do with it. WDC didn't have anything to do with it. But how do we make sure that ultimately we find a way to get it paid back? It'll be paid back. It's just at certain points you go beyond the process that they're empowered to statutorily to now have to go to the Department of Administration. In a similar way, when the audit came out in 2006 of the Department of Commerce, one of the things they highlighted in that audit were all in those cases, it wasn't just DOA, it was DOJ loans. DOJ references. They had to make references to the Department of Justice for loans that were made under the old Department of Commerce back in 2005 and 2006 that weren't at a point where they could be collected on and had to send them to the state's Department of Justice to act on.
Yeah, but my response to that would be, threefold probably. First of all, I don't want to go and analyze what loans they gave, what loans we're giving, and this isn't really about underwriting. I don't question our underwriting. I'm not saying we're making good loans or bad loans. I'm just saying that administratively, it's our job collectively, we have a fiduciary responsibility as a board to have accurate information in front of us and to know, exactly where things are at. And as I've indicated, I think we've made great improvements here, but the part that I still don't have clarity on is when I look and I'm not clear, and maybe Secretary Hipsch can add some light to this. I just don't understand. Has this been an ongoing process where they've always been sent over to DOA, and so do we have consistent data to be able to make comparisons over time so that, and it's not just for us now, but it's like, okay, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, will we be able to compare apples to apples and know what our responsibilities are and how well we're dealing with it, because it's our job to trace these loans, whether they were made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 2 years ago. We have to have a good MIS system, which we've done better with, is knowing they're 30 days due, 60, 90, and of course that's what the SBA did when I was there, and even when I was on the board of Lake County Partners that made their own loans, we did the same. But can you just add some understand, and again,
Well,
it's partially because Representative Kirkman was the one that actually raised it, not me.
Well, but I think that the data, I get her point, she's obviously a good friend, but I think more important than analyzing a quote is analyzing the data.
Right,
And
that's
so,
what I'm trying to understand.
No, that's why I was asking before we go to Secretary Hipsch, why don't you tell us first, and then you can say what the next step is, but why don't you tell us how does she get to the point of saying something goes beyond these other pages, how does it get on the pathway towards being referred to the Department of Administration?
Well, and Hannah can weigh in too, but why don't you weigh in, Hannah, actually?
But this was actually something that we at the very beginning as part of our transition, and we spent an extensive amount of time with Department of Administration, legal counsel, and Department of Justice attorneys, and myself and staff, talking about what do we do with commerce loans once they get to the point of determination was made by the Department of Justice that once it reaches that point, we have to refer them to DOA for DOA to evaluate and then decide whether to refer over to the Department of Justice. And Department of Justice won't give us updates on those loans because they aren't ours anymore. They've been referred to DOA and they are considered the states because they were under the Department of Commerce. So that's not, we've been doing that from day one, and is something that that we've strictly adhered to. So that's the reason for it.
That's helpful. Can I just get some clarification, because that was really helpful, I think, yeah. So are you saying, is this similar to like the HUD situation, because we're a quasi-governmental authority, that we can't collect, and that's why DOA has to handle that function?
It
Or
was a
I'm just trying to
determination that was
understand
made
this.
by the Department of Justice that because the Department of Justice represents DOA and other state agencies, but the Department of Justice does not
Okay,
represent
that's very
WEDC.
helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And because those were state-issued loans by the Department of Commerce, the determination was made, okay, we have to refer those to DOA, but once it's a WEDC issue loan, then we can handle the collection.
That's very helpful.
That makes,
Thank
I
you.
think that's part of the key point you're trying to
Yeah,
get at.
very helpful. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Because when I look back at,
That
because the
makes
last
perfect
time there was a
sense.
comprehensive audit like this at Commerce in '06,
Mhm.
there were 42 loans that
Sure.
were sent to the Department of Justice. That would be like the 3 that are here that go into DOA. The difference is exactly, and I think light bulb went on exactly when that point was made, because they were made under a state agency versus a quasi. That's why they were there first for justice to be able to take them.
Right,
Yes.
right.
So we
Well,
need the funds to go back to the state.
We would go a step further, I mean, going back to Paul's point, which is an important one, and we'll get into this later, I mean, it's part of the reason why I want to make sure, and the governor, you agree, and we go language, because I agree with you, we want to make sure with the private bank, that these are loans that they're not going to do. And you could even probably go so far as to say, if we never had a delinquent loan, then really, why were we making these loans? Why couldn't a bank have done them, you know, I mean, so you're always, I don't think any organization in the history of the country, whether it was, you know, Commerce on the federal level, SBA, EDA on the federal level, on a state level, or, you know, our counterparts, WEDA, you know, you're gonna have some of that, and we understand, and we, you know, we appreciate that, because, you know, obviously our goal is to have far more winners than losers.
And even the losing quote-unquote loans still serve a valuable function by either maintaining jobs where they need to be because the absence of the loan would be more catastrophic, or even startup, and it's very true in the technology area, even companies that grow but don't eventually succeed still create a lot of value. They train people, they move technologies forward, they support companies like Epic and so forth, and they create the next generation of companies as well. So they all serve useful functions for the most part.
So moving forward though, with WEDC loans, we handle the collections, is that the case?
Yes, and we have outside counsel that we've retained. It's a couple of loans from our outside attorneys now.
So DOJ won't be involved
No.
at all?
Good. Well, Lisa, was that yours? Okay.
That was all I had to say.
I'm hearing through we did acknowledge that we have been completing reconciliations between our award management and our accounting system, and they've just recommended that that process by documenting the process that we're following, which, you know, is part of our next year's plan as well, is to work through documentation of a accounting procedures manual. So we'll certainly make sure that that process is documented as well.
I didn't see anything in there unless I missed about controls. Did they review the controls in place or?
Yes, I mean, it's my understanding that this report covers our financial controls in place during
So there were no
during
issues?
the ones that they've included, to make sure that we're maintaining all the full documentation and finding things correctly.
Great. Any other questions? Anybody on the phone? Yes, Senator Lasser?
Yeah, just real quick. Dave, if you could talk about, and I'm sorry, maybe you had earlier, but I didn't hear, but one of the recommendations that LAB made was to establish delinquency rate goals. And I was just wondering, you know, what process we'll be taking in order to address that, and what, you know, what your current thinking is on that.
Sure. Yeah, I did talk about it briefly before that, you know, now that we have 3 years of data for our WDC loan portfolio, we're going to take a look at, you know, all the different metrics that are measuring loan delinquency, and we'll work through our awards administration committee, specifically our private bankers that sit on that committee, to discuss with them what they feel could be any additional metrics that would be valuable to.
Okay, so then when they're talking about the delinquency rate goals, I think we're currently at a little over 8%. Are they then talking about how we can drive that delinquency rate down even further? Or just, like you said, additional measures?
I don't think LAB has a recommendation at all on what they feel that our delinquency rate should be. You know, that's why I report to it quarterly to our awards administration committee and quarterly to this board is, you know, to really get direction from you guys on whether or not you feel that our current rates are acceptable. You know, as Ray and Paul just pointed out, I don't know how much lower we're gonna be able to get it, or how much lower we really want. But, you know, if the board says that they do, I can sure try my darndest to get it there. You know, so I think that's the route that we're gonna take, is we'll just continue to report on it, and I'll take guidance from the board on, you know, if they wanna establish a formal goal, or if they like where it's at, and warn me if they feel it's getting too high, or, you know, I'll take whatever approach you guys want.
Sounds like one of the things worth looking at, and Senator, this might be what you, is there more than one metric? Is it just percentage of outstanding, or outstanding principal rather? Because again, you go back the last time we had an audit like this at Commerce in '06, the outstanding, the percentage of outstanding debt on principal was 10% back then. There were 49 loans past due, plus the extra money, or extra loans, the 42 they had to send the Department of Justice. We're below that, but I still think part of their question wasn't so much should it be even lower, it was, is it worth just looking at that one percentage, or are there other matrix? And it sounds like something you guys are
That's something
talking
we're
about
gonna
looking
review.
at.
I mean, there's, you can measure a portfolio a number of different ways. We could measure it on number of loans compared to total loans. So we've got 30 out of a portfolio of 300, that's 10%. The principal balance is 8.8%. Our payment delinquency is 2.7%. So, you know, any one of those are completely valid measures of risk within your loan portfolio. And so anything that we want to take a look at, or we think is a good thing to set a goal on, I'm more than open to. You know, the important thing is that we do measure it by all of those metrics, and we know what all of them are.
I also think it's important as a board to recognize that it will always be a balancing act, because there's a function that we play and a role we play in the marketplace, and to retain and attract jobs. So it's always going to fluctuate. It's what the risk appetite is, and it's always going to be a balancing act. That's the purpose behind WEDC, is to fill that niche.
Senator, you follow?
It's true.
Yeah, I agree with what Lisa said. I mean, that, these businesses were able to get a traditional loan from a financial institution, they wouldn't be coming to us. And I do think that there has been significant work that has been done by Jake, and the reason why we got it on this with the first audit is that loans weren't being tracked, and I think that where we're at, given the recommendations in the LAB's audit this time, I think well to the work that has been done to really make the process much better than it was in the beginning of WEDC. So you guys have done a good job.
Good. Additional questions? Great. Thank you, Stephanie. We're now going to go on to what? Oh, I'm sorry, you got more?
I have two other updates. First,
Oh, sorry, so excited after that. Cue my eye. Way to go, right?
thank you. First, I just wanted to give the board an update with our financial statement audit for fiscal year 14. We are on track for having that issued early next month, and so for our October board meeting, shouldn't have any issues with receiving those draft financials or the financials about 2 weeks ahead of time. And we have an audit committee meeting scheduled a week before the board meeting, then to work through that. So just wanted to give you that update. We're on track for that.
Representative Barker?
Just one other thing in regard to administrative costs. They highlighted in bold print that we had a 24% increase, and we knew we were increasing staff, so we knew that was going to happen to some degree. One thing, though, that I think we need to look at is and we've discussed this before without going into great detail, but when you look at the amount for administration versus the amount in loans, it's like almost equal. Now, that's not salaries, though, because part of that administration is not strictly overhead. It deals with program. And it seems to me we may want to analyze, and maybe in the audit committee, Ray, we may want to take a look at this as well, the way in which this is classified, because I think it gives us a little bit of a black eye, frankly, because you look at this, and for someone that, you know, we've gone through this before, but I think it's something like 15 million. Here it says that in 13, our administrative expenses were 15 million. This compares to only 14 million in expenditures for grants and 14 million in loans. I mean, so it looks like we're spending as much in administration, which is not the case, because salaries itself is 8.3 million. And so I think we may want to take a good look, Ray, at, you know, at this issue, and Stephanie, particularly for your staff, analyzing that. But the other issue I do wonder is, in terms of just overall personnel, where are we at compared to Commerce? Like, how many staff do we have compared to what Commerce had prior to us? Do we know that at this point?
Sure, so
In terms of head counts
it's
and,
my understanding that when former Commerce was dissolved, that there were just under 100 staff devoted to economic development. And so we are, you know, at roughly that same size, actually a little bit under. The LAB report lists, I think, 99 as staff members. That included some temporary, some interns
okay,
within that. So it's actually, you know, less than that for full-time equivalent
Okay.
positions. So, you know, given some of the additional administrative tasks that we have that Commerce did, so preparing our own financial statements, you know, having our own legal counsel, those types of activities that Commerce did as part of some of the state functions, the fact that we're under that target, I think is very good.
And also our marketing staff, the Department of Commerce had no marketing budget, no marketing staff, and we have, sorry, Kelly, about 6? 8. We have 8 marketing staff, so that alone is a pretty significant increase.
no, but the only thing that is different, though, is that, and you're saying this is comparing economic development, right? Because obviously the regular isn't in that head count. We shifted that, and that was one of the things I think made sense to go to WEDC, because there was sort of overly encumbering WEDC, you know, the old Commerce Department. But now, the only other thing to off balance that, and it seems like we're pretty close on track here. I think we got to always monitor this very closely, but we don't have the loans that, you know, the HUD loans that are over at DOA, so they've got a certain number of head count over there. I don't know if it's 10, 20, 30, I'm not sure how many people you have for HUD, yeah. About dedicated to that, yeah, it's hard to separate probably, but I think that's the offsetting part. So if we were to compare apples to apples, you know, it sounds like we'd have to discount some because we have legal staff that they didn't have, but then we also don't have the HUD loan staff to administer that they did, right?
We've picked up lending quite a bit, though. So in the last 3 years under Commerce, loans that were done is roughly 26 million in state loans. In our first 3 years as WEDC, we've done $41 million in loans. So we've almost doubled, not quite doubled, but, you know, significantly increased our amount of state loans that we're doing. So we're doing quite a bit of lending, and should, you know, we did almost $20 million in loans last year.
You know, let me ask just one more point on that, if you don't mind, Governor. This is somewhat unrelated, but the fact you brought that up, one of the things that hit me is, I know what the SBA, one thing that they did, which helped bring down administrative costs dramatically. In fact, I think we reduced the size of the SBA by about 25%, you know, under President Clinton. And part of the way that was done is we went to preferred lenders and certified, where we didn't have to do our own underwriting because the banks did that. And to what degree do we simulate that currently under WEDC? Do we have any kind of a process like that, or do we have to underwrite every single loan that comes to us?
Underwrite our own loans.
That's what I thought. So that's something, Governor, I recommend that we take a look. Once again, we want to reach out to the Banking Commission and, you know, our Banking Association and get their input into that. But I'll tell you, that was something at SBA was very successful, is in the concept behind it was Erskine Bowles was really kind of a genius behind this. And his idea was that, why should we underwrite the same loan? And there was an 80-20 match. So the bank has 80% of the risk. The SBA only had 20% because we did loan guarantees. So the idea is, you know, they're putting 80% at risk. Why would you do the same underwriting? But again, it was for preferred lenders. They had to go through a very rigorous process. We had a whole team of people that evaluated them. But it's something we may want to take a look at, you know, longer term as an organization.
We have to remember that banks don't really want to touch the loans that we usually look at. I don't think they're going to do underwriting for us unless they want to participate or we're somehow coordinating a loan situation with the bank. So I agree.
So
We
we
did
don't
that
have
with
any
the,
matching funds, they don't put in their own money for any of
very
our loans?
little of our loan portfolio, our guarantee portfolio is related to that.
For our technology development loans, it's based on outside investors, not on bank
Mhm.
matching. So their loans get matched to ours at either on a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, or 4-to-1 basis from private investors, not from an underwriting and bank. So
Okay,
volume-wise, that makes up a large portion of the volume of loans that we do,
Mhm.
is in that technology loan portfolio.
And we did use that system for guarantee for system.
that's right.
The banks
Yeah, I
on the road,
remember
that's
that.
why we could do it so quickly.
Yeah.
And the large majority of our guarantees in general, while we don't have a large guarantee portfolio, the large portion, the majority of our guarantee portfolio that we do have, we rely on the bank underwriting for the guarantees.
Oh, we do, okay.
So it's just our direct lending
Yeah.
that we do ourselves.
And what, how does it compare, like with WEDA compared to us? You know, because they do more loan underwriting, right? I mean, where they're doing more matching funds with banks,
I
or?
would have to refer to WEDA to know what they do.
But they have an underwriting department.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Just to continue on some of that discussion about the administrative breakdown, because the way that the audit report displays administrative costs is not the same way that we internally categorize our administrative costs. And I think we had this discussion back at our last board meeting, actually, when we talked about the plan. Looking at this next year's budget, only about 11% of our budget is actually allocated to what could be office type function, and our administrative or our support department, compared to 89% then for our operational department. And if you just look at our salaries and benefits, that's only 14% of our overall budget. So, those are the ways that we typically would, and like I said, we did talk about that at our last board meeting, so that,
Right.
just so that everyone understands.
And we pressed that point with the audit bureau, as, when we initially reviewed the draft with them, this is their classification, not ours.
So can I ask a quick question? So 2 points. One is comparing to commerce the right thing? To me, something different on the table. And I know you have to be, I'm very aware of headcount, but if you could bring more headcount in and compare it to the success of, name a state, should that be our comparator? That would be one idea. The other thing I think we need to be aware of is salaries that we're paying. If we are a quasi-public-private entity and we're paying public salaries, and we just went through interviews with highly qualified candidates, we've got to pay attention to that, because we'll lose good people, and I know we've had some turnover, and I think we've got to be really attentive to that. I know full private salaries and go down that path, but pay attention to that.
And that's part of the charge, we looking ahead to early next year too, or in late this year, or early next year, with Secretary Hipsch knows this because he sits in with me, as we put our next state budget together, and then obviously work with the legislature on it, not only for WDC, but for all the other agencies. We've really asked them to do this next go-round, not look at where you're at versus your base year, but say, what do you really need? And kind of build from the ground up and say, if I just gave you a lump sum, where would you spend it? Not how would you add to this program, that program, how many employees. If I just said, here's your blank check, now you go spend it the way you want to, how would you spend it? Because my guess is, and it's true in business as well, larger a business gets, the more bureaucratic like government it gets. A lot of times it's you're building it off of what your piece of the pie is, as opposed to say, if I could just spend it, what would it be spent on? It's a whole nother discussion.
Well, and Paul, I'll tell you, I mean, we're talking about this later in the agenda, but turnover is a problem for us. I mean, the turnover, based on the statistics we put out ourselves, is 25%. I mean, that's not a good record whatsoever. There's a lot of factors that add to that, but compared to overall agencies, it's well over double. But there's a real issue there, and I know that we're trying to address it as WEDC. I know that, as I understand, I got the document that we put that, we're looking at sort of employee messaging, management training, interview process, things like that. And but obviously, it's something that we
Yeah, and my biggest concern is if we're hiring people from the public sector, or private sector, that think they're walking into a private sector, or at least half private sector industry, that's not what, or group, and that's not what they're doing. I would expect that kind of turnover because they're gonna come in, as opposed to maybe another agency where people are coming in without that expectation. I wouldn't expect it to be that higher, I guess.
You'll have some other facts on that turnover rate. 25% was a snapshot, including limited term intern program. So I think that's an artificial, and Christine will share some other numbers with us later in the program.
All right, then, just one more comment, because I know we've talked about some of what we've seen in the media, related to the Legislative Audit Bureau report, and, one of the articles that I just want to make sure that, I talked specifically to the board about, that came out last week from some of our board members, and I just want to make sure that we reassure, them that, we have not given up on our loan collections policy here. Our employees have not given up on that. They're working very hard on that. I just want to make sure that message is heard and understood.
Good. Thank you. Next part is on committee charters. Hannah, I'll turn it over to you to talk through a little bit of the resolution we've got in front of us.
Sure. So there's a resolution and then the charters for the committees in your binders. Based on the discussion that we had at the last board meeting, the board wanted us to draft up charter for an audit committee and then a separate budget and finance committee. So we have spoken with probably all of you, as we have asked for more of your time. So we've listed, so the new charters are the audit committee. It's not new, but it's been revamped somewhat to clearly delineate it from the budget and finance committee. And the audit committee, played this role of evaluating our audits, our internal monitoring function, and advising the board on those activities. And then the budget and finance committee playing a role in providing an evaluation of our budget and operations plan and other finance-related matters. So we're very excited about this, and then we have the supplements attached to each one of the charters with the proposed members that have been nominated for each one of those committees. And I'm happy to take any questions about these.
Questions, Paul?
Do we have, going back to controls, the overlap of membership? I didn't actually look at that. Is there heavy overlap between the three, or?
With the committees between the audit and budget and finance.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah.
Good. Additional questions? Yep, go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, on the awards administration committee charter, one of the things that has frankly bothered me since it was created is that it's unlike the other committees where there doesn't need to be a majority of members present in order for the meeting to go forward. The quorum consists only of 3 of 8 members, which includes a WEDC staff member. And I was hoping that, I would ask Paul if there has been a problem getting, quorum in the past where it's only been the 3 committee members, the 1, WEDC board member, the 1 former banker, and then a WEDC staff person. If that's been a problem because, when, only a certain level of awards come to the full board. And with the awards administration committee, I was hoping that we might be able to bump the quorum requirement up to 4 of the 8 members being there in order to make a quorum. And so I don't know, Paul, if you could talk about your experience, if there has been a problem.
Yeah, not at all.
Being absent.
Yeah, Senator Lassa, there's been no problem at all. In fact, I think both of our bankers have been on the call every time, maybe one vacation in there somewhere. Ray and I have been on the call, I've been present, Ray's been on the phone every time. If been anybody missing, maybe once in a while someone from the staff it may be missing for whatever reason. So I feel very good at this point about it. I think, recommendations that we'll make today were made by the entire group. I feel very uncomfortable if the bankers weren't on the phone. They've been incredibly valuable to bring insight. So, yeah, I don't really see an issue with that right now.
So Senator,
I was wondering
oh, go ahead.
if it would be possible to, instead of having setting the quorum threshold at 3, which is less than half the members being there, to put it for quorum where it would be majority of members or 4 or a majority, because I think that that's such an important committee that, I would like the threshold moved up a little bit, and given that they haven't had a problem with having more members participate in the committee in the past and getting decisions made, it's just like every board member was on the call when we took up the ProPage loan program as a full board. I'm hoping that we could at least change this part of the charter so that it would be 4 or more.
Senator, what about,
Just like the other committees.
yeah, what about, I'll just throw this out as a suggestion, on the organization, on the charter for the awards administration, it says, third sentence in, a quorum of any meeting of the awards administration committee shall consist of, and right before identify, right after the word of, before 1, what happens, we said consist of 4 members of the committee, including at least, and then, so it can be, it has to be at least those, because I think it's important to have one of each of those 3 on, but if you had to be 4, so it could be at least one of those 3 and somebody else, because it doesn't.
Yeah, that would be perfect for me, because I do think that it's important that there be at least one Swedish board member that's present, one of the former bankers. I think, just like Paul said, their expertise is really key, given their experience. So I would be absolutely fine with that wording there.
Yep, so we'll add that as a, without any opposition, we'll add that as a simple amendment to that language. Good. Next, Senator.
Okay.
Hannah?
Are there any other questions on those? If not,
Anna,
Yeah, go ahead.
Corey,
Corey?
just a real quick question. I noticed Senator Latham was listed. It was my understanding that he's formally resigned from the board. In the room? I'm sorry.
We need television screens, obviously.
He's both simultaneously turned red and laughed at the same time.
Rumors of his death.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Hi, Corey. I'm very much looking forward to the audit committee.
My apologies.
My wife's wondering where I got to, so, yeah.
We'll leave. Corey, did you have anything else on that?
No, that was it.
We may never hear from Corey again.
A couple of, on the awards administration committee, it says in the last sentence, or the first to last sentence, that notice designating an individual to participate in that particular meeting on their behalf. We need to, should that be more specific? Just wondering whether it should say an individual from management or the board or something like that. Or not.
no, the intention there was that if any one of the committee members wanted somebody else to.
And they can't vote anyways. And then on the compensation and benefits committee charter, I know under authority and responsibilities, and this goes back to what Representative Barca and that I brought up earlier. Should the compensation committee be looking at executive level salaries, private market, or economic development rates and that kind of thing at least once a year? Should that be solely in the hands, or should there be some kind of an assessment? Should we have an outside benefits agency or somebody looking at that kind of compensation, to make sure that we're being, we're in line with what the market's presenting.
And we do work with an outside consultant, and the Comp and Benefits Committee has been playing a role, but if we could add something in here, I mean, I look to the Comp and Benefits Committee, whether adding something in here, that at least once a year that would need to be reviewed.
It's no question about what you're doing in that
No.
regard, but I think it's helpful to do that at least.
We rely on the outside consultant very heavily. I mean, that's where our ranges come from.
And we were provided that information twice, I think.
Several times.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable
Yeah, I
request to
Yeah, but-
memorialize the charter. It has been a practice of the committee.
So what was the language you were suggesting?
So I was suggesting that under authorities and responsibilities, it would be evaluate executive level compensation packages.
On at least an annual basis.
Yeah, on an annual basis, right. I'm assuming that the CEO salary is that on an annual basis?
No. It was said initially, and that's fine.
Senator Lasso?
Questions for you. When you talk about executive level salaries, and from what you just said, you're talking about like the vice and CEO, COO, and those folks. Do we also look at, just given some of our turnover, I don't know if those go to salary or better opportunity somewhere else or what have you, but do we look at and do for other levels of employees within the different divisions, make sure that we're being competitive out there, not only with other economic development organizations, but with the private sector as well?
The survey we have surveys our entire staff. Comparing it to state employees and the private sector, there's 3-4 different bogeys that they look at. We do look at the entire organization, establish ranges for the entire organization.
So I was just the executive level, because there's a limit at which, as you respect that the board just should be leaving to management, I guess, and their discretion or to report to us on an annual basis.
And the benefits committee has always been very limited in what it looks at for compensation. I mean, it might be informative, but management handles employment matters and compensation matters internally, and it's probably beyond the board's scope of duty.
But I think sharing the report of all the staff and the ranges with the compensation committee is very appropriate.
Right, for information purposes.
And if we follow any corporate, the board is in charge of CEO SIP. That stops there. We don't go down past CEO. So we're just kind of following protocol of common business as well.
Well, actually, that's not exactly true here, Ray. We actually had passed a motion, back, 8 months or so ago, and we drafted a bill in the legislature that the board would be responsible for the CEO, COO, and CFO of the organization. Governor signed off on it, put it to the legislature, but it never passed. So actually, as it stands now, only the chairman of the board has anything to say about that. So.
But on your point on that, though, per what Paul's suggesting, that would give us, you're saying codify, so that it's not just the practice the committee uses now, but in the future, they're looking at not only the CEO, but the executive compensation and having an outside consultant, so then the board can see where those numbers are coming from.
That's good suggestion.
Well, it's also, the most important thing to me is that there's some heft behind making sure we're paying people appropriately.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to make sure, that there's some support, as I think there is, for making sure that we're compensating top-level people for top-level performance.
And in the past, we've come to the board with recommendations, review of Reed and hiring him and that process. The compensation and reviews per the state and the rank and file employees as well. So, and that has all been voted on by the board
Yep.
in past compensation reports.
So is there any opposition, including the language Paul mentioned in here? Without that, we'll include that.
And what I'll do is I'll change that for under authority and responsibilities, I will change that line salaries, and it'll read, determine the CEO's compensation package and evaluate executive level compensation packages on at least an annual basis.
Any other questions? Okay, with those two changes, the one we just heard and the one that Senator Lassa suggested, we've got the original at the beginning of your tab, the resolution on committee charters and appointments of committee members, and then the documents that are behind, but that's the actual resolution that we need to adopt, so I'll entertain a motion for adoption. Move, second, whoever wants it first. Been moved and second, discussion, Tom?
In the second resolved paragraph,
Mhm.
it doesn't seem to read right.
There's an extra that needs to be, we'll take care of. It says the appointments of appoints, and the appoints.
And it refers to multiple resolutions in the last resolved paragraph, and then a single resolution in the final paragraph, and I'm not sure if I assume it's a single resolution even though there are 3 resolved paragraphs. I just, for consistency, I didn't know if there were, if that should be plural or single.
Yep.
Those changes noted. Is there additional discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the same. Motion carries. Move on to item 6, which, Hannah, will give you that as well, the amended WEDC bylaws.
Yep, so the amendments to the bylaws, we've just given you a red line version. The change is on page 4 and 5. And this is just to change the language consistent with the approval of those committee charters. So we've just modified easier to, if we wanted to create new committees, but also just codifying into our bylaws the committees that the board has now approved. Any questions?
Second. Moved and seconded. Any additional discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the same. Carries. We'll go on to number 7, which is the annual report on economic development, and we'll turn it over to our COO, right?
Great.
Up to the screen.
All right, well, we're getting the presentation. Dozens and dozens of our staff in all of our program areas. A lot of our folks on the ground get a lot of credit, and they should. They do a tremendous job, but we also have a lot of folks back at the office in our underwriting department, in our support divisions, and who also do a tremendous job to make everything you're reading about possible. So I want to do just a thank you to, frankly, our entire agency on the phenomenal work that everyone does. The actual compilation of the report itself is the work largely of our teams in legal and compliance, public policy, IT, marketing, and underwriting. So I especially want to call out Amy and Hannah for leading really a great team to pull together the report and to make some of the enhancements that you're going to see. So just a thank you to you and to your teams for that. All right, we'll just kind of flip through. I think as everybody knows, we're statutorily required to submit this report every year by October 1st. From a staff perspective, we really welcome the opportunity to share. We think it makes us one of the most transparent agencies in state government. It's another example of our strong commitment to accountability in all aspects of our operations. And in addition to providing complete transparency with regard to our investments and their outcomes, through this report and accompanying online database and impact map that you'll see again, WEDC provides full details of our planned investment strategy in our annual operations plan and strategic plan that the board sees. So just before we kind of dive into it, a summary overview of fiscal year 14. You can see 4,200 businesses assisted, a job impact of almost 33,000 jobs, $156 million in investments that generated $1.6 billion in capital investment around the state. And I really think that's a significant point. A 14-to-1 leverage on our money, I think, is a really tremendous sign of the work that we do, and that it really does play a catalytic role, that we're not leading the state's economy, but we're supporting the state's economy and its growth. And I think the last bullet is one that gets overlooked a lot, but we're really becoming very efficient with our resources. We saw on a amount per job award basis, increase in the amount that we're spending per job created, which I think is a really positive sign about really stretching our dollars even further. I do want to take a moment here to talk a little bit about our goals throughout, and we discussed this a bit at our last meeting also, but setting reasonable goals has been an ongoing challenge of the organization and the lack of historical reference points for a number of programs that have been newly created in the last couple of years. Beginning in the next annual operations plan in FY16, we anticipate beginning to blend the process we've been using to date, which is really a very formulaic approach. We have X number of dollars, we intend to make X number of awards, and that will result in X number of jobs. We intend to start blending that with a 3-year rolling average of the history of our programs. To, I think, some much more realistic goals where we see each year going, and I think it'll provide the board a much better basis to from year to year, rather than against what I feel have been some fairly arbitrary goals up until now. Continuing the overview, you can see that the job impacts are down this year. The net decrease can be attributed really to 2 programs, economic development tax credits and enterprise zones. The economic development tax credit, and this is a topic we've, I think, also discussed in the past, but we believe there was a 39% reduction in utilization of economic development tax credits this year. We believe this is largely due to the ramp up of the manufacturers and agricultural tax credit. One of the questions that we work through with every applicant for tax credits is how they'll be able to utilize it and whether they'll be able to utilize it. And increasingly we're seeing companies coming in and saying, because of the manufacturers and ag credit, we just don't have a tax liability, or we certainly don't have as large of a tax liability as we used to, which is obviously a really great thing. But the flip side of that is the utilization of economic development tax credits has gone down. Now, the legislature tackled this in a small way in the last session by passing a limited transferability bill, which allowed companies tax credits to transfer them within companies in their supply chain for goods and services, and I think that's a really great pilot program that we'll be able to measure and see how that works. And my hope is the legislature will take this up again next year and look at expanding either transferability or refundability to make tax credits an even more effective tool and keep us on a solid competitive edge with other states on incentive programs. The enterprise zone awards, I think the nature of this program is just fairly lumpy. It very much depends on the specific projects. There's a wide variance between the individual projects. The state of Wisconsin only has authorization for 20 of these zones, and so a significant difference between just 1 or 2 different projects can really lead to some pretty wild swings. So as you can see in fiscal year 13, our lone enterprise zone that we awarded, which was Coles, had a job impact of 6,700. The 2 that we did in fiscal year 14 had job impacts of 2,000. We do have 5 more enterprise zone commitments that have been made in 2014, but are not yet contracted, so they're not reflected in the report. But they are on deck and being negotiated as we speak. So we think that that'll add to next year's tally. So while the annual report provides some really granular detail on the performance of each of our programs, it also our performance against the key metrics in our ops plan. The data shows that we've assisted 4,000 businesses in the past year between our work and the work of our strategic partners. In addition, we've helped 119 communities take advantage of economic development opportunities. You can see is short of our goal. In discussions with staff and in review of plan and performance, we actually identified some areas in our tracking of technical assistance that we think can be improved. We do a very good job of tracking our technical assistance within program areas, but when we provide technical assistance that's sort of beyond a program, for instance, helping a community apply for a grant, say a CDBG grant or a federal grant, we haven't been tracking those types of assistances because they aren't strictly considered a program. We believe we've made some changes for fiscal year 15 to ensure that, and I think show that we can meet our goals each year on communities assisted. As far as our financial assistance portfolio is concerned, we made 316 awards, totaling over 156 million directed at business development. You can note that our bonding was down considerably. This is almost exclusively due to the Midwest Disaster Area Bond, very popular during the 3 years that it existed. However, we did see a doubling in the number of grants awards due primarily to the launch of the idle sites and the community development investment programs, which were very successful and very popular, and also a 20% increase in the number of loans, which I think is a really good sign of what's happening to our economy statewide. You can see that most of our funding solutions come with a significant co-investment, which I think is very important. Again, it's WDC is meant to be, you know, the catalyst, but not the ecosystem, and I think you're really seeing that in our leverage amounts. And so the 14-to-1 leverage ratio and the over $1.6 billion, or almost $1.6 billion in other capital investments that we've incented. And ultimately, our goal is to help companies take advantage of the business opportunities in order to retain and create jobs. Many of our financial assistance contracts with businesses make this requirement explicit, whether the investment's meant to help a company add new employees through expansion or retain existing employees by strengthening their operations. Either way, the expected is recorded in the contract and contingent upon its attainment. To be clear, each year we record the number of committed jobs out of our investments. And as you know, it takes time, and in some cases, multiple years, to fulfill the terms of those commitments and create those jobs. So again, the numbers we report in the annual report are the committed jobs to be created, recognizing that those jobs may actually be created over a multi-year period. WD jobs impacted annually according to the contract signed. They include executed contracts from both the current year and also commitments that may have been made but not contracted until the current year. Jobs impacted for commitments not yet contracted at the current year are not included in these numbers. So again, this kind of continues to be in our reporting, in that our staff spends a considerable amount of time working applications through the process, through underwriting, through our management review committee, sometimes through our awards administration committee. They're approved, they're committed to, but the contract negotiations with the client last past the end of the fiscal year. So that project does not make it into the annual report until next year, even though most of the work was conducted during this year. So it's just sort of a reality we live with our reporting deadlines, but just to show that there is a considerable amount of work that doesn't always be in the annual report. And then, of course, after contracting, we receive regular reports from companies who've received awards from us, and we track and report that information both in the annual report and online in order to gauge the overall program effectiveness. You'll notice we include in our reporting data relating to the performance of our key strategic partners. Partner investments include contracted business assistance services not provided by WDC, as well as strategic support for small business assistance operations around the state. One of the key recommendations of the original Be Bold study was to better all of Wisconsin's economic development organizations into an extended partnership that works together. WDC adopted that charge in the strategic plan that was approved 3 years ago. While key strategic partners are only a small fraction of the 650 economic development organizations that we work with, they do represent our strongest partnerships, and they really play a significant role in achieving WDC's annual goals. There's a number of enhancements in this year's report. It really reflects our commitment to looking at the report every year and trying to improve it. We take that commitment very seriously. As I mentioned, we have an annual report steering committee comprised of representatives from our legal and compliance departments, credit and risk, public policy, marketing. They meet regularly throughout the year, although more frequently towards the end of the fiscal year. They have a stated mission to be a national leader in transparency, and the team is continually finding ways to present richer and more informative data. Additionally, the annual report project manager begins working with other reporting agencies in late spring and goes out and actually consults with all the other state agencies on how to submit their data in the most transparent way possible. And one person I hadn't singled out for their work, but who really does a tremendous amount of work to make this report possible, is Emily Clovette in our compliance department. Just does a fantastic job and really herds together a lot of agencies who are difficult to herd sometimes. Of course, not DOR or DOA. So at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about the map and the database online, and then we'll come back after that and dive into some individual divisions. I want to, is Eric here? Yes. Perfect. So I want to take a minute to recognize the university partner that WEDC to build and continuously improve our economic development impact map. Eric Compass is the director of Pangea GIS Center, which is part of UW-Whitewater's Department of Geography and Geology. Pangea operates under the university's nonprofit status. All studio student employees and staff are university employees. Funding for the studio comes from university funds, grants, and project income. Project funds are used to cover the cost of the student employees and staff work time and supervision and the general operations. The goal of the studio is to provide low-cost GIS solutions to public and private organizations across the state and to provide professional real-world educational experiences to its students. And where appropriate, Pangea works with other UW offices, including the state cartographer's office at UW-Madison. And a tremendous partner for us and really, frankly, I was told not to say this around you, but a fairly low-cost option for us. So, exactly. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric to talk a little bit.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I think, is Melissa, I haven't met everyone that do I need to do anything to queue up?
I got a
Yeah, he's got the. Actually, Ryan.
Ryan, can I borrow your phone, pleasure? Well, thank you, everybody, for a little bit of time today to talk about the center that has produced this map. So I know that Pete Norman's going to show you some of the details of how the map works, and you last year. Now, I was asked to tell you a little bit of the backstory about how this was created and what kind of opportunities that's meant for us, and in particular my students. So I want to do some introductions. Again, I'm Eric Compass, a professor in the Geography and Geology Department and the director of Pangea Studios. I also have Guy Heydrich here as the new program manager for the center, and two students. Cole Eisenberger, he's an IT major, and Aaron King, who's a biology and geography dual major, both of which are actually actively working on the project. And before we've done a lot of the work, but before, I want to be remiss in acknowledging some of the other partners. So this has been something that WEDC, it came to us through the state cartographer's office and the state cartographer, Howard Varigan. He brought the group together, which included some groups, some folks from Madison. So there's the UW-Madison Cartography Lab. And we saw this as a great opportunity for us to highlight some of the things that we can do on the academic side and help contribute to telling the story of WEDC and some of the economic debate. So I'll leave some of the details about exactly what updates we've made on the map to Pete and give you a little bit of background about how this was actually created. So our center, our studio, was created a couple years ago from an Economic Development Administration seed grant, so federal money. And the goal was to provide GIS, or mapping services, to local companies and economic development organizations. So you have in your hand the pamphlet that we produced as part of that project to hand out to local companies. So we've worked with a lot of companies that wouldn't have access to some of the, this is something that the large Target, Harley Davidson and so forth would do as part of their marketing and so forth. And our goal internally is to provide experiences that our students wouldn't normally get. So as an academic, I'm always looking at ways to transform how I do my job and how I do it better. And this is a way to give students experiences that they never get in the classroom. At the same time, obviously providing professional services for the clients. An acronym, GIS there, I want to explain that, Geographic Information Systems. It's a term that's growing, and it's folks that are aware of it. It's come out of the natural resources area, so DNR and National Park Service and so forth, they know what GIS is. But it's growing its use within the corporate world and in health services and so forth. So again, that was our goal, to kind of help spread the word about what GIS could do for companies. And we've done some market analysis for companies trying to identify clients across the country. We've looking at tightening supply chain. We've got databases and stuff that we have access to that helps us do this. Globally, it's a $5 to $10 billion industry. It's good news to my students that there's about a 20 to 30% annual number of jobs. And again, one of the things that would make this more prominent is one of the major companies has just donated $1 billion worth of software for STEM education for K through 12, something that was big news within the industry. I'll give you a glimpse of some of the things that we do and where kind of the WEDC project fits in. We've mapped youth crime in Haynesville. We've made print publications for the Walworth County Economic Development Alliance. We've had students out mapping infrastructure in the city of Elkhorn. On our own campus, we've built a mobile application to help students with disabilities to navigate campus and avoid stairwells and curbs and so forth. A couple years ago, we took part in an international competition with Google to map campuses. We placed third in that competition. And most recently, we received a NASA grant. Everyone's jumping on this bandwagon. We've got our own little drone that we're flying around and trying to figure out both commercial and research purposes for that drone. Probably the biggest story for me is the impact that the center and projects like WEDC has meant for my students. So the students, we're at about a 90% placement rate for the students that have come through my program. We've got them spread all over the map. Nick and his arrow, he's up in Alaska. So he's kind of out there, but all the way down to Florida. Companies such as Garmin, Epic, SHE Technologies in Minneapolis, GeoDecisions, with titles such as GIS Analyst, Market Research Analyst, GIS Coordinator, Graphic Designer, Web Entrepreneur, and even a co-founder amongst our alum. And we've been told by employers that we have students that some of the best trained undergraduates that they've seen, and to please let me know when I've got others that are coming down the pipeline. So for you guys to take note, I've got some that are graduating in December, and they'll be in the job market soon. So thanks for the time today. I just want to say that the WEDC project has meant a lot for our students in providing them incredible opportunities. And for me as an educator, it's given me another opportunity to help transform how we do higher education and change the way we prepare our students for the workforce.
Very impressive.
So thank you very much. And I'm not sure, Aaron, or Ryan, who I'm handing this off to now.
And enough to be.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you change your family name to be more marketable?
Yeah, Dr. Compass. I thought about putting myself up on eBay and seeing if the universities compete.
No, seriously,
That's
this
much
is
better
very.
than- I once had a medical examiner named Dr. Happy, so that's. This is much more appropriate.
So, just, it's very helpful, very useful. Do you, in terms of, like, the clients that, your center has, I mean, obviously you put this together for us, and then do you have, as part of, like, internships for your students, like, clients that are approaching the university on a regular basis to have data put together for them, like on supply chain or some of these other matters, or how is that going?
We've got a wide range of clients. That's why I was showing some of the examples. Local government, state government. We've worked with several nonprofits. We've done mapping in Haiti. We'll be doing a project for Rock River River Basin soon. And then corporate clients has been small who are entrepreneurs who are starting their own company. Want to know about beer sales in the Midwest.
That's good.
And, up to one-person shops to companies that have several hundred employees.
So are you able to pay your students that are doing this work? I mean, are there, like, paid internship opportunities, or how does that work?
So we're a fee-for-service group, and so we're kind of an entrepreneurial island within our campus, and there are several different centers that exist on campus. And so we bring in revenue, so this is fee-for-service,
Sure.
our clients pay. I pay my students, I won't let them talk about what they actually get paid. But it's meant, once they've graduated from our program, one of those students, he said, all right, I'm quitting next week, and he flew off to Germany to pick up his BMW and bring it back. So I don't know exactly what they make afterwards, but I think it's better than what I'm getting right now. Any other questions? All right, thank you much. Thank you.
Pete Norman is WEDC's business analyst, and he's kind of the keeper of the map in the database. So he's going to kind of walk through some of the enhancements.
Just figure out how we get out of here.
Matrix, the key matrix.
Do you need the clicker, Pete?
No, I'll go really old school here. It works for me. So those of you who were here last year, well, we weren't here, but who were at the board meeting about a year ago, we had gone over an iteration of the impact map. Really, it was a great opportunity for us to get this new concept out in front of people and show that we're trying to find ways to make the work that we do accessible to the public primarily. But it also helps us internally as well figure out, okay, what sort of perceptions do we create out there, and how can we help people understand the nature of what we do and sort of the scope of that. So this is, we're not numbering things or anything. This is just the new version of the impact map. It does have a number of new features. You'll find them on the printouts of the slides. I'm just going to hit a couple of them because I want to remind you that basically what this is a tool for you or others just to go see what we're doing and see what it means to you. A couple of I can't help but point out, it's got the easiest starting point of anything ever because it says just do 1, 2, 3, 4. Just do what it says and you're going to be fine. So we're going to click anywhere to go to the map, and lo and behold, it brings it up. The first thing that struck me, and I know Eric was thinking years ahead, but starting to be worried about it, is we've got a lot more dots than we had last year. That's a good thing. It shows that, A, we're busy doing things, and we're able to show you that we're busy doing things. The other thing that's great about that is us. We are now, in January, we had included DATCAP awards, which is helpful, but we now have also DOT, Tourism, UW System, WEDA, and WTCS. Each of these agencies has some awards on the map. I would not come close to saying we're comprehensive in they're doing, but then again, we think some of what they're doing is economic development, and we're not sure about the nature of how exactly to portray their programs. So this is the sort of relationship building that we will continue to pursue over time, but this is a starting point of getting them on board with our thoughts on how we present the overall impact that the group of us are having on the state economy and the efforts that we're making to make that happen. So that's kind of what's important about that. As you can figure out, but we can go ahead and click on it anyways, if we select something, it filters the map down to whatever that particular agency is. And then we can also, of course, choose different fiscal years. So we can say what's 2014, 15 in there. This is, I should point out, a development version. It's not scheduled to be live for a week, so we've got little things that we're still tweaking out. But we can show 2014 activity. We can show, this is near and dear to my heart, WEDC activity in Eric in 2014. And the shading for, as you can see, we're looking at counties. The shading for each of these just shows the relative amount of each of those things that are out there. So the darkest areas, where population centers are, have the most number of wards and most concentration, whereas the less populated areas tend to have less. The heartening part is that over time, they kind of fill in a bit and you start seeing a pattern developing. You look across all the agencies and it's really, almost the entire state does receive some benefit from this mix programs that are being implemented by the different agencies. What else is new? We have, we have different colored dots. We didn't have that before. So the difference is if I click on a dot, we had this last year, it'll show you, okay, well, this is an award that's out there, that's great. If I click on colored dots, it's the same thing, but I've got this next button. What that lets me do is it lets me page through the different awards that happened in that particular geographic area. It's helpful for a couple of reasons. One is, once we're zoomed out, and we're still working on exactly how this works, how do things have to be concentrated into this cluster. But if to keep the map from looking like a pincushion, it lets us kind of manage the user's experience a little bit. And the other part is, if we're across different agencies, there are multiple awards made to the there are multiple awards made to the same organization or governmental unit. Go through them and see them, because you don't have this problem that there's one dot on top of another dot. That solves. The other thing that's new on here is you can search now, which we couldn't do before. And that helps if you can type, of course. But typing isn't always the first thing. Is the easiest, even for me, believe it or not. So what that does is it finds this. Look, there's the thing. Hey, look, another new feature that we have this year. We used to limit the information that we were providing, and it wasn't limited for any other intention beyond, we weren't sure how to present the rest of it. We have figured out a way, with the help of Pangea, we have figured out a way the rest of the information on there and to break out more detail. We can be more transparent, and not only that, we can also handle other agencies having different kinds of metrics than us. So DATCAP can show pounds of milk or number of cows, which isn't in our wheelhouse as far as the types of things that we were presenting previously. So that's great, and if the projecting sort of thing is a problem here, see there's this little purple dot here where advanced technology is. So it see where in the state something is if you only know the name of it. Now another thing that's helpful, so that's basically what's going on with the map. You can also, you've seen this before, but you can flip through to see different kind of districts some of you are very familiar with. Economic development organization areas, if you click on a region, it tells you what the name of it is. Whatever you've got filtered, it summarizes that information for you. You can create reports. So all of this stuff is the same stuff that was there last year. You bring up, so now you've generated a report, it shows you where that is, gives you the name, tells you what you filtered on, gives you summary information, gives you a list of who was there, alphabetized for your convenience, and then gives you some pretty basic breakdown by industry or by award type, just kind of the nature of the different mix of things that were occurring in that area. I think it's great. I think it foreshadows a lot of where we're going in the future as far as helping people understand how we think we're making a difference and the kind of that we have in mind as far as what is the breadth or the scope of the services that we're providing. So that stuff's helpful, and then you just saw where we're going, but we'll go there anyways. So if we go back to advanced technology, we also have, this is also new, linked to the searchable database. It's always been in our head that the annual report on economic development actually has three parts to it. It's that three-legged stool you'll hear economic development people talk about all the time. But there's this formal presentation in the thick book, the PDF. There's the map, which shows you where stuff is. And there's their searchable database, which lets you look a little more at how the project played out over time. So we can now go from that particular award on the map, and we can here and say, oh, so what's going on with that project? What's it supposed to do? These are the same metrics that were listed on the map, but instead of just showing you the goals, it's telling you, here's when this is when they're supposed to happen, because there's a plan and actual for each one of them. So they're supposed to have 120, well, maintain those jobs. They're going to create the jobs first. They're going to create 120 jobs by 2015. Their actuals so far, they've got 30 and 80. It looks like they might make it. That would be great. Look forward to that. I like to see them exceed it. But this helps you understand not only what's going to happen, but when's it going to happen, and how realistic is it that it's going to happen. Put together a little bit more of that, and it creates the type of transparency that can inform people so they really understand what we're doing. And it makes it more real. So it isn't just somebody presenting you with a go look. It gives you, a little bit more of a foothold in what's going on. And yes, just to make sure, there is a CA here, so you can go from an award back to the map, and it will bring up that spot. So in this case, it's got this funny little square with lines on it, but it takes you the other way as well. So you can search in the online database for something you're looking for, so you can filter on the criteria that are available there, and then go look at it at the map, on around there, and see what's up. I really didn't want to spend a lot of time on it. It's a tool for you to use, for people that you know to use, tell your friends about it. It's public facing. This, like I said, these are the development versions, but in a week, anyone on the planet can stuff and see what's going on. And we're totally dedicated to this development direction as far as being a cornerstone of our transparency. Yeah.
Good question. So one of the next steps would be combining with what we saw earlier and going after what's the impact of the award elsewhere? How far are you, I know you're working toward that, but
Right.
how far along are we on that?
So we've got discussions scheduled to talk about that because it really is one of the next things. And it's actually an impediment for us working with some of the other agencies. If they're working on, if they're providing services to an area and that's how they're tracking it because that's really the nature of the program, it just works better for them if we have some way to show the region of impact. The challenges that we run into are, it isn't that we can't put it on the map. I mean, Eric will tell you on the map. But what we are more challenged to do is then when you create one of those reports and it's broken out by counties or economic development organization, how do you figure out what part of that gets reported anywhere if it's an area that crosses other things? We've got other considerations in that same vein when that we make work through a partner or another entity to help us distribute or to help us conduct the program that we've got in mind, like Export Tech works that way. And our ability to be able to show that second layer of recipients who are really the end beneficiaries is limited or in the position to double count anything, but that we can more completely show what exactly we're doing out there.
I think of the Marinette Marine example where they were, saying it was going to expand and all the companies that were going to be created, and do we have a way to monitor and count that?
Right.
To see that impact.
And we've got economic modeling tools as well that we're using internally, and we're trying to figure out how we might look for similar types of things. You've got supply chain, you've got commuting patterns, you've got, because a lot of what we're doing is sort of planned impact, you really have to make some assumptions. You have to base it on something. And so we're trying to identify the best practice models for us to be using so that we can continue, as we've started with Pangea, to use people who are experts in the domain and do the right thing.
Just curious, how often do you update?
So our schedule is basically a quarterly schedule so that we can update the searchable database and the map at the same time. I personally would like to be more frequent than that. We need to make sure that we've got all the steps in place to make sure that whatever we're putting out there is accurate. And, accurate first, timely second, and boy, I sure want to be timely.
The new stuff goes live within the next week or so, is that what you?
October 1st is our scheduled date for everything.
And now we just need to get more people to know about what's available about WEDC and our activities, and I would encourage that legislators, again, are almost always looking for items to talk about in columns and in e-updates, and if you were to get out to legislators or on October 1st, they'd probably share with all their constituents getting information on this webpage, and it would be a nice shot to connect the legislator to WEDC and their constituents.
Right.
Any other questions for Pete on the map or the database?
Very nice.
Excellent, thanks.
I don't do it alone.
Can you get me queued up on
Melissa knows what to do. We each have our area of specialty.
Actually, Paul's point is a really good one that we're really putting a lot of focus on. I mean, the annual report is, in a lot of ways, the sum of our contracts, which I think is an important tool of tracking, but the impact of the projects is so much just the job created at the company or the investment being made at the company. The investments that get made throughout the supply chain within each community where the growth occurs, the impact it has on property tax base, on state income tax collections. When you think about the investments that WEDC makes, even on a traditional, the taxpayer is really getting paid back multiple ways on that. They get their, but they're also getting all the tax collections from the impact. And at this point, we track that information, and we're looking at various tools that some states are experimenting with. Their job of reporting on those investments. So now what I'd like to do is run through sort of division by division and do kind of an overview of each. I will point out we have each of our vice presidents here as well today, so if you have Any specific questions, I'm happy to answer those, they're happy to answer those as we go through. So business and industry development we'll start with. We've had some great successes this year. Obviously the Midwest Energy the opening of the Energy Innovation Center, great success for us, almost $1 million in state funding to help get this launched off the ground, and very much modeled after the Water Council, really bringing together industry and the government to catalyze a real effort around the energy, power, and control sector. Scale Up Milwaukee and the Scalerator has been, I think, also a very interesting success. You know, entrepreneurialism often gets thought about as high-tech companies, high-growth companies, and we tend to forget that entrepreneurism is actually a much broader term, and much, you know, traditional companies that are looking to scale and grow really deserve the same level of attention as sort of the sort of sexy high-tech companies do. And so I think Scale Up has been a tremendous effort at helping existing companies efforts and grow that way. We've been, I think, more fully deploying our minority loan fund grant programs, and the minority chambers of commerce, I think, are building out their capacity to do loans, and we're seeing a lot of great growth there. And then the statewide expansion of the Wisconsin Procurement Institute was also a great success. A couple of challenges we face. We still tend to face some challenges with speed to project on a lot of these engagements. They're very complex, and WDC takes very seriously the notion that we're not meant to be the leader of these efforts. We're meant to be a supporting role for these efforts, and we really want industry to lead these efforts. And so when you let industry lead, that does take some way in terms of the timeline. And so the MWork Energy Innovation Center is a good example. This was a multi-year to get them ready to go, and it was good that it took the extra time to make sure it was done in a thoughtful way, but it also means that money to launch that in fiscal year 13 did not get spent, and it ended up getting spent instead in fiscal year 14. So we still struggle with that. We're looking at ways to try to speed those things up, but we just, you know, as long as industry's leading and we aren't, we're just always going to be a little bit at their mercy on some of these projects.
On this slide in particular now, with the minority loan fund grants for capacity building, you know, it's what was the baseline? Where did we start? Where did we end? What, you know, I think it'd be helpful to know.
Sure.
You know,
So we've done,
obviously in the minority community, there's great concern,
absolutely.
and unemployment, of course, as you know, Governor, being from Milwaukee, is just extremely high, and so I'd like to know more about it.
So we've done two kinds of grants to a number of the minority chambers. We do direct grants for the loan funds themselves to populate their revolving loan funds. Those have been $100,000 annually. This year we also did $100,000 grants to the Hispanic Chamber and the African American Chamber to help fund some of their infrastructure behind this. It doesn't do anybody any good to give someone money to loan out if they don't have the infrastructure to actually you know, give out the loan. So we're committed to both providing the funding to the businesses, but also providing the funding to the minority chamber to make sure that there's a sustainable loan operation there as well. For $100,000 grants that were given out. I don't know if you want. Do you want to add anything to that, Lee?
No, I would just add that you know, these were chambers that were usually quite immature, so this wasn't really a fertile to kind of fertilize that field and water it quite heavily before they were made ready to undertake this effort, because it's very new for them, $5,000 loan constituency that they serve. Whereas before they were somewhat divided from that constituency because they were not seen. This has helped them to achieve ready direct relevance, and the community is being very responsive to that. I would just add beyond that these investments have had a very positive catalytic effect in the minority business community. 2 years ago, we did not have a minority business coalition. In fact, these chambers were more competitive than cooperative. We now have that minority business coalition, and in fact, they've just effected their first leadership succession. This is a phenomenally positive development, showing that these communities can actually work together to plot future expansion and development, identify future opportunities, and make progress. That to me is a sea change. We have seen a sea change in that community in the last year in particular.
I mean, do we have a specific, I mean, I know in the statutes, before we created WEDC, we had various programs that were all wiped away, and we had a minority loan program specifically. So, I mean, these 2,000, are welcome, and I think it's a good idea. But do we track, do we know how many African-American businesses receive loans, how many Hispanic American businesses receive loans, and how are we doing? I mean, you know, one loan doesn't, the fact that this chamber helped one company is nice, but that's not obviously potatoes compared to the bigger picture. So I'm just wondering, how did we do? I mean, did we have 100 loans 2 years ago, then we have 125 now, or 5, and now we have 8, or what data can you share with us?
Do you want to?
Yeah, our object was to extend up to 30 loans in the minority business community last year. I didn't expect that the Hispanic Chamber was going to be active in this fiscal year. But the Hispanic Chamber instead wanted to raise additional $1.5 million matched to this fund before it activated, so they didn't actually extend any of loans. The total across all chambers in the fiscal year was about 21. The majority of those were the African American Chamber for the First American Capital Corporation. We could reach that run rate this year because all these funds will now be active and actively deployed. The Hispanic Chamber has secured this additional $1.5 billion from commercial banking sector and is ready to deploy. And I looked at their sort of pipeline of pending requests, and there are about 35 companies in that pipeline. So I don't know if we will reach that minimum loan extension in this coming fiscal year.
So I mean, are those, if I'm following you right, you're saying this 30, you said we had 21 that were given numbers, but I mean, obviously it can apply for any one of our programs, to be a technology program or anything else. And so I mean, across the spectrum for the various tools that we have available for entrepreneurs, I mean, aside from these 21 that came from the chambers, how many other ones do we have? And you know, do we track it that way?
Minority Assistance Program along Representative Market or across?
No, just across.
That number immediately, but in other programs in our division, the number of such companies assisted probably numbers about 7. There have been companies assisted through the Global Water Center. There's a company that's going to be assisted through the Energy Innovation Center, but to be able to identify that as a specific reading, I don't have.
Okay. Well, I mean, put you on the spot. I mean, maybe it's something that at a future meeting we can take a closer look at. It's something, you know, interest and concern to me. And the corner state that I'm from, it's a big issue. When I was in the Clinton administration, one of the things that we did at the SBA is, you know, we challenged people to go out and, you know, market heavily, you know, in various communities to try to boost up the loan volume for, you know, whether it be minority loans, women loans, or other categories. So I think it'd be worth taking a look at, particularly just given, you know, the high unemployment level and given the potential when you have minority-owned companies. So we could just, not to belabor the point here, because I didn't mean to catch them flat-footed, but just pique my interest, or if we could maybe in the next meeting just take a little closer look, and maybe we can follow up individually as well, so we're prepared. It's an important area.
But even for something to bring it up in the next marketplace, tie in well with the businesses that would be attending them.
Yeah, that'd be good. Then my second point would be on the Procurement Institute, which I think, you know, I think has enormous potential. You know, and of course, former Congressman asked this, a huge success in the state, you know, when they, you know, for a while the Aspen Procurement Institute, I think it's called the Wisconsin Procurement Institute, is this center. And what are we doing in that respect? I mean, to help, you know, Wisconsin companies? I mean, do we strictly work through this center? You know, it probably makes sense to do. And what's our role with them? How are we handling this? Because
it's the primary way in which we support assistance for federal contracting. We certainly work with companies on a one-on-one basis. Obviously, some major defense contractors in the state that we support in a whole host of ways. Sectors, it's mostly through the Procurement Institute.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think there's you know, a great deal of potential there because obviously the federal government's a huge purchaser of services, and so something else I think we should take to see if there's extra efforts we can have, because, you know, if you help, you know, to navigate their way through, whether it's the Defense Department or any department, it could be education for computer type services. You know, we had a success governor with the company up in you know, the Stevens Point, Wausau area. What's her name? I'm blocking on it now. But I mean, you know, we should be looking at that, because I think that's another way to boost jobs, is by helping to navigate their way through. So, thanks, Ryan.
Community development. So this year, I think we've seen quite a bit of success within the community development. We obviously have a community development investment grant program, the idle industrial sites program. I think that were both cool and popular. We also focused on staffing and bringing on 2 new professionals within our community development, which has really led, I think, to a re-energizing of both the Main Street and the Connect communities, and it's really, I think, helped quite a bit. You know, one of the areas of challenge that we've touched on earlier across all of our programs, but is a real particular challenge in community development, is sort of this impact beyond jobs. A lot of the community development projects funded are more foundational, so it's not a specific, you know, grant or loan or tax credit to hire a specific person. It's about providing infrastructure upgrades or planning grants, things like that, that don't have an immediate today job impact, but really lay the foundation for quite a bit of future growth. We've had a difficult time tracking that in the past, and we're looking at ways to try to do a better job of tracking the impact of those assistances. As I also mentioned earlier, the standardizing of tracking of our technical assistance beyond our program assistance, and that's something that we've focused on for FY15. And then obviously the historic tax credit program has gotten quite a bit of attention this year, and we're continuing to sort of track the impacts of that program to help inform the legislature moving forward on what we think the use is going to be and sort of an appropriate way to move forward with that. Economic side. So I think you've seen a pretty significant increase in the overall leverage of our projects, which I think is a really great sign that companies are coming to the table with larger projects and with smaller gaps for us to fill. Certainly we've exceeded the jobs impact goal, although we've talked about the challenges in goal setting. The emergency loan guarantee for propane dealers was very helpful to the 4 companies we were able to help. And the special project loan fund, while we approved this only in April, we did not push through any projects in fiscal year 14, but we do think it'll be very popular in fiscal year 15 and really filling a gap for some operational funding that companies have been looking for a while. And then tax credit transferability we're looking at for this year to really take off, and hopefully again look at an expansion through legislation transfer credits. Some of the challenges, certified sites was certainly a challenge in fiscal year 14, very successful in fiscal year 13. And I think almost because of that success, we were tapped out on some of the larger sites around the state. The original requirement was for a minimum 50-acre site. Because we approved 13, any that we thought that actually ended up coming through. So as a result, for fiscal year 15 in the operations plan you approved at the last meeting, we lowered that acreage requirement to 20. We think that's going to bring in a whole new set of applicants to the program. It's been, I think we've had now 3 projects that have happened at a certified site as a result of our marketing of those. So really, I think a really great program that's starting to get a lot of attention around the country. Other challenges, open records continue to be a significant challenge, and we hear about this all the time from clients. We ask for a tremendous amount of information from businesses, from our applicants. A lot of it is very private financial information. Some of it is proprietary as it relates to the products they make. We also ask for, in a lot of cases, personal financial information. I think understandably, a lot of clients are very reluctant to turn that in, just knowing that it could become a matter of public record. I think in the last 6 months or so especially, we've seen a tremendous uptick in the number of open records requests we have and the number of companies that are getting mentioned in the paper, and in effect, I think, on companies and their willingness to work with us. It's something that I really hope the legislature will take a look at next year in maybe tweaking some of that language.
Are there strategies or tools that other states' economic development corporations have used to address that problem? Because I've heard that from people as well, where they, you know, they have valid concerns about making public, as you said, proprietary financial information.
It runs the gamut nationwide. Some states are even more open than we are. I mean, we have exemptions for pending deals that we've taken advantage of. Some states don't have that. Other states go the other way and are total black boxes and could really find a place in the middle where private business financial records are able to be protected, and for the long term, personal financial information is able to be protected, but certainly award information, And most of our staff reviews should be available for public inspection once an award's made.
I was just gonna say that being able to check from the public's standpoint, knowing that we've checked that information and have considered it thoroughly should be enough without having to see the numbers and the details.
Right.
Should be. Well,
Yeah.
sorry.
So what's the primary concern? Is it very competitive information that a company has? Is that the primary?
I don't know if I'd call that the primary. That's certainly, we certainly run into that. Businesses just having their private business financial information, revenue, sales numbers, those things, they feel like it's a real competitive disadvantage to have that out.
So has any legislation?
And most of our work is with private companies. We don't do a lot with public companies.
So has any work been, or any legislation kind of been?
We haven't seen anything yet. We would very much support, and we've been talking with our organization, the Economic Development Association, about supporting legislation along those lines. You know, our partners are actually our largest concerns. A lot of them are nonprofits that do economic development work that were specifically spun off by local communities in order to address this issue. And so for us to work with them, for instance, on the implementation of our statewide Salesforce software platform, a lot of our partner organizations have some real concerns about sharing information with us, knowing that once we touch it, it could become a public record.
Just want to be able to review the information.
Yeah. So anyway, that continues to be a concern, and then we already touched on the decrease in economic development tax credits for that.
Ryan?
Yep, go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. And I'm sorry, I can't see what you guys are seeing on the screen, but I was just wondering about some of our grants. I really want to compliment you guys. I think that this report is helpful in terms of helping to get more clarity on what WEDC is doing. I do think hopefully we'll be able to work with Amy and the staff there to make it easier for more lay people to be able to make the information more understandable if you don't have more of an economic development background. But I'm just wondering on the workforce training grants, the capacity building grants, the community development investment grants, and the idle industrial site redevelopment. If there, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me on these, because I would think that these would be some of our more popular for building Wisconsin's economy. And why, like for workforce training grants, I mean, we only get it at our goal and the capacity building grants, and I know that some of the capacity building grants are going to some of the minority chambers of commerce and really work at doing a better job of economic development for those different communities. But we missed the goal there by 50%, and the budget was only the budget was spent, and then for the community development investment grants, depending on at the assisted 20 to 35 projects under expected outcomes. The goal was missed by either about 25 to 57%, and only about a quarter of the budget was spent in single site. And I know that is a popular program, and that Reed had mentioned it and highlighted it during his comments on this year's ops plan. But I was just wondering, how can we make sure that we're meeting our goals and Ryan, you had talked about, as we get more experience, we're going to be able to set better goals for ourselves based on experience. But can you talk about what type of outreach or what you're looking to do in terms of improving, meeting some of these goals so that, we can, really help rebuild the state economy and use taxpayer money efficiently and effectively?
Absolutely. Steep drop in the number of applications for these projects. I think that's largely due to the Department of Workforce Development's ramp up of the Wisconsin Fast Forward and other programs, where I think that has provided an even greater level of assistance than we're able to through the workforce training grants, so businesses are choosing to go there. But certainly I think, from a marketing perspective, I think we can do a better job marketing that as another tool available to companies. On the capacity building grants, this is a new program in fiscal year 14. Our partners who submitted applications spent much of the fiscal year pulling their applications together and really working with our staff, what was an appropriate request or not, and that took a good chunk of the fiscal year, and so a number of projects that we thought would be funded in fiscal year 14 are much more likely to be funded in fiscal year from that project. And then on CDI, I think it was frankly, I think a misjudging of what the average award size for these projects. We started seeing some really good projects come through at much higher price points than we thought they would, and so we chose to focus on really high quality projects, fewer but higher quality projects moving forward. And what we've done, as you know, in the new year is implemented a competitive process where we're really going to be able to judge projects against one another rather than on kind of a first come first served basis like we did in 14. And I think that'll help us spread the dollars around, but also maintain kind of a high quality. And then kind of the same story in idle sites as CDI. So but I think the point is correct. I think we can do a better job marketing our community development programs. I think they're incredibly important. They're very popular in the communities. They do provide sort of foundational level of support. And frankly, these are things that have a very hard time getting funded otherwise. It's, lots of people trip over themselves to pay for a job today. It's harder to find dollars to pay for something that might create jobs 2 years from now or 5 years from now. Like infrastructure upgrades, things like that. I think it's really important, and it's really filling a need in the marketplace. But yes, we can do, I think, a better job marketing it.
Could you, I don't know if we're to this section yet, but on the job tax credit, can you just talk about I know that we had transferred money from the Action 55 credit.
Yep.
Where we had transferred credits over to the job tax credit. Can you talk about the spending that was done? And I think, on average, when I talked to Amy the other day, about $4,500 per job for all of our programs. And, I think that's a good number. But when you look at the job tax credit, I think we're spending or twice as expensive. I think it comes up to around about $10,750 per job tax credit, and just why that is it's looking a bit different than our other programs.
Yep, absolutely. I think the utilization, the increase in the utilization is a direct result of the economic development tax credits becoming less take advantage of a non-refundable credit. They are sort of naturally coming in and asking for refundable credits instead. It also reflects, I think, the project-based nature. It's companies are coming in with something they want to build, a group of people they want to hire. It requires cash today, and a refundable credit can help generate cash faster than a non-refundable credit. So they've been increasingly asking for those. It's also becoming just a more competitive landscape nationally, where companies are receiving really significant award offers from other states, Texas, California, Arizona, Kentucky, New York, and they're coming and saying, look, we've got this significant offer, what can you do? and more often than we used to, we have to get hired closer to the max in order to be competitive. So it's a trend, I think, as we talk to our colleagues around the state, it's or around the country, it's a trend we're seeing everywhere. Companies are becoming better negotiators, and they're also becoming much more aware of what's out there. And so that's causing the price of these to go up a bit. So I think that's really the largest reason why you're seeing the bigger utilization there.
And the higher dollar, although put in perspective, Journal Sentinel in 2007 found that Commerce was spending just about $17,000 per job. So it's all relative to where we've been in the past.
It is, and I think our overall number of 4,500 across all our programs is very competitive nationwide. Lower, I would say lower.
Representative Barker?
So 2 questions. One on this, from refundable and non-refundable. You mean for the jobs credit specifically?
No, the jobs credits are refundable
Right.
credits. Yep.
So which one went from refundable to non-refundable?
Neither one. So what I think companies that normally would have come in and asked for a non-refundable credit, the economic development credit, now that the manufacturers and ag credit has reduced their tax, those are less useful to them. And so instead they're coming and applying for jobs tax credits.
I see what you're. Then the second thing I wonder about, because that brings up a good point on the marketing side of the equation. Now, we talked, I think 6 months ago or a year ago, I know that there was going to be a specific push to have our, field people, I don't know what we call them, area managers or something like that, to go meet with bankers and talk to them and try and help to push our products. And did we get any kind of an assessment, whether it led to any more activity in certain categories or any feedback that they got? Because clearly, so many of these categories were down significantly, and obviously, I don't think, you look at the overall jobs impact, we're not achieving the goals that we set. So what was the impact of that? What else,
Sure.
What other things, as you sit down with your team, are they recommending where we can get an uptick in our activity and obviously jobs created?
So I think the outreach has been incredibly helpful. Our team has done literally hundreds of sessions with banking firms, accounting firms, law firms, financial advisory firms. Our attraction staff's been taking regular trips to the Chicago area to also raise that sort of awareness at service provider firms there. I don't have the info in front of me on what that's led to, but I do think it's led to a tremendous increase in the awareness of our awards and in how the programs work. So I think that's been really good, and we're going to be continuing to do those things. I think the increased dollars in marketing has been helpful and has driven a considerable lead increase as well. And so I think it's a lot of just continuing to do those things, continuing to make sure our tools are as accessible as possible to our clients. And I think what we did at our last meeting in tweaking a number of our programs was very positive in that regard. Community development, for instance, we just closed our round 1 application process, 32 applications for $8+ million in requests, which would leverage over $100 million. So I think it's a really good current fiscal year that our marketing efforts have been ramped up and moving forward. So, and as Reed's noted a number of times, and Jake, we are seeing an uptick in lending, and I think that's a really positive sign. But, as we've known now for 3 years, positive changes that the legislature's implemented to lower the cost of doing business in Wisconsin more generally, it has made some of our tools more difficult to use. And when our clients come to us saying, look, Wisconsin's a fantastic place to do business, and the quality of life and the quality of our business climate is fantastic, but it's not helping me build my building today. That's where we need a tool that can step in. And non-refundable credits used to play that role, and they're just not as much anymore. And so we have to look at other financing options. Good. Okay. Entrepreneurship and innovation continues to, I think, have a number of successes. Our Capital Catalyst program continues to be oversubscribed, and I think we could be looking at a considerable in resources for that in fiscal year 16. Our technology development loans, as Paul has noted, continue to play a really important role in helping high-growth startup companies get off the ground. I think a number of our partnerships this year with the university and others have been really successful, and you've had presentations on those over the course of the year. You know, everything from Idea Advanced to Bridges to Cures to We2, our Seed Accelerator partners at MadWorks, the Brew, Revolution Labs at UW Oshkosh. I think some really successful partnerships there. And really looking at ways to expand this moving forward. And I think that as the state's fund of funds gets off the ground and starts making awards, I think that's another great tool that the state will have in its arsenal. You know, we do have some challenges, again, because we're oversubscribed and there's high demand. I think that we, you know, could look at putting additional resources into this in the new year. And then I do think there's some restraints, and we've touched on a few of them in sort of public sector scrutiny, public sector reporting pressures that startup companies especially have a hard time working with. It's oftentimes the job creation takes a little while. It's a very risky environment, and so a lot of states actually lop off their entrepreneurship programs into separate that are publicly funded but truly privately run. Even in Wisconsin, you've seen it with SWIB and WARF setting up a separate nonprofit that does their investment vehicles, and so I think, you know, it's something Wisconsin should look at moving forward. Are we structured the right way to move these programs into the most it can be?
No, your turn. So the SBIR programs, are we currently?
We just launched it this year.
That's right. So,
yep.
and it's relatively small, modest, but
yep.
we're doing that.
And I think yeah, you want to do it?
Yeah, the press release just went out today, so we funded our first 7 companies, so $525,000 just went out for that matching grant program.
Yeah, that's a great, because Wisconsin does pretty well with SBIR grants, and that's a way to kind of leverage federal funds that have been juried and evaluated as effective. Have you looked at Kentucky at all in their program, Lisa? How big?
Yeah, over $6 million in matching grants every year, yeah. And they've been really effective at actually bringing in technology companies into the state of Kentucky because of that matching program.
Where states have supported private, don't have the public disclosure issues, are those also able to be funded then by other parties, by other entities, like private industry or by other?
Yeah, and every state sets it up kind of in a different way to suit whatever purpose they're trying to achieve. But you know, it just is. It's always an inherent tension in really any economic development program that sort of the public scrutiny versus the ability to get a project moving. There's always a tension in the balance, and states choose to do that differently. The nonprofit, the sort of separate private nonprofit model seems.
Is that going to be the same case with the venture fund that was created by the legislature?
So the venture fund is, and that's I wouldn't say it's a separate thing, but it's privately run. Yeah.
So we won't have the same.
No, because the money goes out to various components and then they send them out, which is kind of what you're getting at with the point of elsewhere. It's not the state running a venture capital fund, it's pushing that money out to legitimate fund-to-fund components, and then they distribute it.
And when they report back, they don't have to report back at that already where you get disclosures of the...
Not the same, and it's not, you know, the information and the personal guarantee, you know, it's
well,
not that.
The information about investors in these private companies too. It's not only a chilling effect on the companies, but it's on the investment and the kind of the leveraging we're getting. It's really impressive, and to find other ways to do that would be terrific.
Right. The reporting is much more high level. It's job impact, it's investment attractive, things like that.
It's I was just saying the venture capital fund is part of the reason why we started at the $25 million. A number of you here are involved with it, and then to see what does that do before you start picking another number, because we really don't know. Is it going to be a whole lot more, a little bit more? Is it about right? We really won't know until that starts to be deployed.
Well, they're also going to be measured on rate of return.
Right.
Yeah, they're definitely.
Be careful what you ask for. Right?
Yep.
In the international division, our global business development program grants were on our targets. We've been expanding, as you know, our global network of authorized. In fiscal year 14, we were in 36. In fiscal year 15, we're looking at up to 54 countries with representation. Really provide, I think, a great service to companies on the ground in those markets. Some of the challenges, export tech and trade venture participation continues to be a challenge for us. Getting the sort of C-level buy-in that export tech requires has been a particular challenge. Convincing companies that it's worth the investment, not just in dollars, but in time, to develop an export strategy, to take the time to go to the market. It to be a challenge, and we're looking at ways to better enhance our marketing along with our partners at DATCAP and at WMEP. And then the program budget and per company maximums were an issue in fiscal year 14, but we've taken care of that for fiscal year 15 in the ops plan approved at the last meeting. We've gone from $10,000 in our IMEG and CMEGs to $25,000, which is going to allow companies, I think, to better take advantage of the program. So, and with that, I'd take more questions if there are any. The one thing I would point out is while the annual report is a collection of our programs, it doesn't necessarily capture a lot of our non-programmatic activity. We obviously have a very robust marketing program that doesn't get captured in the annual report at all. But I think it really acts as a support division for the rest of the agencies and does just a phenomenal job.
Can we get a copy of the presentation?
Absolutely.
It's a good summary to be able to refer to when there are questions.
Great. Representative Lasso?
Yeah, Ryan wrapped up his presentation, but, looking at the WEDC report versus, some of the other state agencies that also do economic development work, that are also required to report in Act 125. Governor, I would ask that hopefully we'll continue to work with the other agencies so that we get a much greater level of detail in their report, like such as the and how we're doing, how they're doing in terms of meeting those. But I think this report from WEDC versus where we were with the draft report from last year, I think really shows that there has been a lot of work that's to making the report much more useful in terms of the information that it contains. I think there's still some work to be done to make it, I think, more user-friendly in terms of people who maybe don't have experience in economic development. But I think this is the work. You can tell that there's been a lot of work that has gone into it. And I would just hope that you would encourage some of the secretaries from the other agencies to hopefully get some more advice from WEDC in terms of how to put together a really good report. And WEDC has really done quite a bit of work in improving theirs over the last few years.
Representative Barker?
Well, I'm curious now, on page 9, it talks about impacting jobs. Jobs to be created 10,621, and then we got to 32 just in terms of impacted. What's our goal for fiscal year 15 in terms of jobs to be created, jobs to be retained?
Over 21,000.
So jobs to be created would be 21?
No, the impacted goal.
So our goal is to do less than we did last year?
The goal is higher for fiscal year 15 than the goal was for fiscal year 14. And we had a pretty lengthy discussion, if I recall, at our last board meeting about why the goal is chosen the way that it is, even though we tend to overperform it. Because the goal is truly the sum of our contracts, and so you take a program like the jobs tax credit and you say, all right, statutory maximum is $10,000 per job, the average is somewhat less than that, and so we take the average amount per job versus the amount that we've budgeted for the program, and that's how many jobs we expect the goal to be for that program. What tends to happen instead are projects like Amazon where we incent a certain number of the jobs, but we're not incenting all the jobs. So we incented something like 500 of the jobs at Amazon, but it's going to ultimately end up producing 1,600 jobs. It's just 1,100 for our count all of that because the project wouldn't have moved forward without the incentive. But the goal is really just based on the amount that we're directly incenting.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So on page 9, this is achieved through June of 13, or July 1st of 13 through June 30th of 14, right? That's our actual achievement.
What was contracted,
we created 10,621 jobs directly through our programs, 22,000 retained, 32,000 impacted. So for 15, how many jobs, what three numbers, what are they
So
gonna
for
be?
created, it's 11,200, I'm sorry, it's 12,140.
Okay, and then what's the next one?
Am I reading that right?
So 12,140, and then what would be the next category?
For retained, it's 11,250. And so the total is 23,330.
Yeah, I'm still confused. I mean, it seems to me, I heard what you said, but I'm not sure I read.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like our goal for next year should be more ambitious than this year. We just went through the total report of where we fell short, as of what we're gonna do more aggressively. So it still doesn't seem right.
Actual was, you blew your goal out of the water. You're measuring against last year's goal instead of last year's actual.
I see what you're saying, because the goal was 20,825.
Right.
Be that,
Wouldn't we shoot above what we actually hit last year?
right, that's what
Unless
I'm
there was
getting
some
at. That's
special-
exactly right.
So
Yeah,
the
why wouldn't?
challenge is, and the reason we made this change 2 years ago, because if you remember the first fiscal year, the goal was $50,000, or 50,000 jobs.
Right.
That wasn't supported by the operations plan. When you added up the sum of the programs, it didn't add up to 50,000. And so we said in the next year, that doesn't make any sense, the overall up of all your individual programs. So what we can't predict in any individual year are, for instance, the Amazons, where we can say, all right, we knew we were going to incent those 500 jobs either at Amazon or somewhere, but we didn't know how many more jobs that company was going to create once we incented those. In this case, it was 1,100 more jobs that project ultimately led to. Now, some other project, we might incent 500 jobs, and that's all they create is 500 jobs. That's very difficult to predict going into a year of what type of project it's going to be that comes through the door. All we can predict with any real certainty is what our dollar is going to create in a direct incentive. And so that's where our goal is chosen from. So at the beginning of my presentation, when I talked about our sort of review of the goal setting, for next year, what we're going to look at is trying to blend the way we've been doing it, which is a very concrete dollars per job equals this many jobs in a goal. And we're going to try to blend that with a 3-year rolling average of what we've actually been doing to try to come up with a much more realistic picture of what you should be able to expect as a board in any given year. Lacking that sort of historical point of view up until now, that's been difficult to do, so we've tended towards the. But I think moving forward, it's reasonable to say you can kind of sort of look at your history, look at your concrete dollars are going to do, and blend those two into a goal.
Okay. So I guess the main point I would focus on, let's say jobs created, which I think is the most important one anyway. So we're looking at a 5% increase is what we're looking to try to achieve. And my question would be, when you look at the operational goals for each department, each section, which I think was helpful, it just seems like we have a little bigger goal there than to just go up to 5%, because obviously our goal is to try and grow jobs by a much more significant percent.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering, what else can we do? I mean, should we, back on maybe having a discussion with the board itself, looking at steps that we could take. And I just think that we really need to be much more ambitious about this and maybe challenge each one of these department heads to come up with a plan where they could increase 10% in each one of their departments.
Sure.
I mean,
Well, we can certainly take that up. Just on this item, on the report that we're on right now, it's the Act 125 report, so this is a report of what's been done.
Right.
I think it's worth, I want to make sure in terms of any decisions, we're careful we're not, from an open meetings standpoint, we haven't noticed that we're setting up, acting on policies for the future. But that certainly we can follow up as you recommended in terms of further discussion for the next board meeting. Because this document that we have here, sometimes as I'm reading it, go back and forth, trying to remember, same thing, I go back to plan for the future versus this is a Act 125 requirement as to what has happened, what has transpired. But I think that's worthy for our ongoing discussion as a board and something for the future.
And Governor, I was just going to say, so after this discussion at the last board meeting, I think that was how we ended up with the discussion of creating a board's budget and finance committee, which you obviously just did about an hour ago. So I think that, I think Representative Barca's point is a tremendous topic for that.
Okay, so I would just recommend Governor maybe for the next meeting, and then we can bring it that
Sure.
would be insane. And then we could go, you mentioned if there's one little project.
Yeah.
design, we could achieve 25%
You got
of our
4,000
goals.
jobs. You got 4,000. He's so greedy, actually. What's more jobs in Kenosha County?
I want to help you attain your goals, Robert.
So Representative Mark, I agree with you too. The one piece that isn't there, and I know
I know.
we still have to discuss later. About jobs impacted and kind of that extra piece, because that place, if we get caught, just caution us to be one number, we miss that effect around the table. So the way that if we can ultimately, what kind of impact is Amazon going to have in that community?
Huge.
It's going to be huge, right? And somehow.
Sure, well, yeah, it's going to spur many other jobs,
Yeah.
because, we know that in other places where Amazon's located, you have other companies that locate around there, and there's already a major about land in the area, planning on that, and,
Right.
yeah, so you're right.
So,
Good point, Paul.
the more we can keep developing that, I think is gonna be critical, because that can really tell the story, as opposed to us all just getting so focused on that and saying, you don't get a bonus this year because you didn't get.
I think that says you look at it as a state taxpayer, you want to know
Yeah.
the impact of what you're doing, both in economic development and tax growth, tax revenue. You want to see everything.
Any additional comments, questions? Thank you. Because, as I mentioned, this is required by the statutes under Act 125 to be presented to the legislature, we actually have to entertain a motion for adoption of this report. So move, Representative. Is there a second? Second. Additional discussion? Signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the same. Motion carries. We'll now go on to committee reports. And I didn't hear if Corey's still on, but Corey and/or Stephanie can walk us through contracts.
Still here.
Good.
The contracts committee report is pretty straightforward. The committee reviewed and approved the procurement request for a retainer of up to $450,000 over 3 years with, and just by way of quick background, WEDC wants to better utilize this trade show exhibit booth and further align deployment with the agency's overall marketing efforts. And there are plans to increase the number of deployments developed in May of this year for booth staff training, etc. Responses to the other from Nelson, and they unanimously selected Durst based on their experience, professionalism, cost-effective approach, etc. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't know if Sarah is there to answer any detailed questions, but that's pretty much it.
Any questions? Great. I'll go on. Thank you, Corey. We'll go on to Paul. You want to just walk us through the Awards Administration Committee?
Sure. Jay deserves a lot of on this for being at our meeting. When Senator, when you were talking about changing the quorum, I was going to say Jake Kuster has to be there for any discussion because he has all the knowledge for the most part. But this arose. We're discussing kind of job reporting by awardees. I think this arose out of the awardees could take funds in and then lay people off or outsource jobs. Representative Barca raised this, and with his SBA experience, he had asked at the last meeting that we talk about the justifying the need for funds. So companies saying, hey, I do need those funds, and here's why. The SBA does that, and it suggests we do the same. And then also making sure that we had safeguards against companies moving jobs out of Wisconsin after they receive those funds, as you mentioned before. On this 2 or 3 times, and I know Jake's group did a lot of going back to the drawing board as well, and I know Representative Barca's staff also did a lot of work on this in terms of providing language. So the committee met and talked about this, and Ray is on that committee as well, and what we wanted to focus on first and foremost is we all want job growth and job retention. I think we all agree across the group, and we want most of our funds, if not going toward that goal. But we also face the reality of the competition for jobs is fierce, not only between but overseas as well. And businesses are having to be very nimble to be able to stay consistent with that. And so there's this element of anything that we can do to help businesses be effective at doing that when they receive an award and grow. We want to be able to do that and avoid duplication of effort. And on the other side of that, we have to hold our companies accountable to the taxpayers. We they're doing what they're supposed to do when they get these funds. So some language was recommended the management team about how to work with that challenge, and the committee felt that we didn't want to hamstring the businesses with really tight language they would have to report. I think one of the recommendations was they would have to report within 7 days if they lost or if they were going to lose any job. So if they had an award, that they would have to report within 7 days that they gave up a job. So does everyone agree with my recommendation?
Those opposed, nay? As the group talked, we were really conscious that by trying to have businesses recommend within 7 days or report within 7 days seemed to be a heavy constraint on a business. Businesses shift workforces up and down on a regular basis based on the economy. So we will ask Jake and his group and see if this information didn't exist elsewhere. Was there somewhere in the state government? We found it difficult to believe there wasn't a place in the state government where that information exists. Jake, you went and talked with the Department of Workforce Development. Do you want to just summarize real quick what you heard back from their group?
Sure. So we talked to a number of different people, including Reggie, within, Secretary Newsom, and who was currently with and some of their suggestions moving forward. And the second member of the Awards Administration Committee kind of outlined both what our internal committee thought with the input from Department of Workforce Development. That being that we already have the warrant system in place within the state of Wisconsin, that it is a pretty robust system in the fact that it is already twice as restrictive as the federal level is. And also that the Department of Workforce Development is working on a shared database warehouse that different state agencies can provide information within that, as well as without having to have individual data sharing agreements and stuff like that. It's very complicated with the Department of Workforce Development. Something that other state agencies could subscribe to and have information that they need and could use on a regular basis. So what we brought back to the committee was two different suggestions. One, better utilize the WARN system and get that information from them in a real-time basis. So we are currently set up on that now, that when a report is turned into the Department of Workforce Development, we receive that report on the exact same day that they do. And in addition, continue to work on a longer-term strategy. I've been part of some of the planning for this shared warehouse already, as well as probably about 5 or 6 other staff within WEDC. And as we start to move down, that happen, and the committees and stuff like that, we're going to have an active role in that. What that would do is provide us information, real time with the quarterly reports for unemployment compensation and a lot of the other data that Department of Workforce is already getting. So, so that was how we feel that we could work.
And I think when we were evaluating, we were also looking at what is being done. So current procedures that are already in place for this is all awards for specific purposes of projects, and the funds are tied. WEDC does not make awards when the intent is to move jobs outside of Wisconsin. We have to be beginning. Contracts include default events, so things like relocating and so forth. Changes have to go through an amendment process that also goes back through underwriting again and addresses that issue. Awards require annual performance reports, and you have to talk about how the money was spent, summary of the bond at the same time. So we put together a recommendation based upon it, and I want to say the bankers were really felt very strongly on this. And on this committee, they contribute regularly, but they really felt strongly they didn't want to see the businesses. They knew they have to be held accountable, but they really wanted to be careful about demanding too much documentation. I think when a banker tells me they don't want too much documentation, that says something to me. So, so the recommendations we would be making are that there would be a narrative question added to the application, find the need for funds, and Representative Barker, you had asked originally, I think at the last meeting, based on your SBA experience, that we just have every applicant justify the need for funds. So that would be the first thing we would recommend. Then the language would be added to our contracts that states that the WEDC funds cannot be used to relocate jobs outside of the state of Wisconsin. It would be added to all financial assistance contracts per your recommendation. The third thing we would do is have certification to be added to our annual performance report stating that no WEDC funds were used to relocate jobs outside of the state of Wisconsin, added to all financial assistance annual performance reports, and that again is per the representative's recommendation. And then the bigger, I think the piece about reporting is the part that we probably all need to discuss more in depth, is that management would regularly, and by regularly we mean weekly, they would what's called the Wisconsin Business Closing and Mass Layoff Database, WBCML. That'll be catchy, I'm sure. By the way, it's not the WARN. WARN is the federal database. Yeah. Against the WEDC award portfolio database. Now, apparently, there's only a couple companies a week that show up on this database, so it'll be very easy to do that. And then they'll provide documentation to our committee as to what the follow-up action is going to be. And in fact, companies that report here are required to do so 60 days before somebody off. So instead of 7 days after they lay somebody off, we're going to have 60 days before. So I think that's a nice thing, or a nice improvement there. It has a couple of holes. Businesses under 50, so those that qualify as small businesses, would not database. Having said that, I don't know that we want 10-person companies reporting when they've got 2 people a month, or 6, as many of the high-tech companies will often do. That would just be my input on that side. And then those businesses still have annual report, so you still have that channel, or that handled that way. And then if anything is any company significantly reducing the workforce, the DWD would alert WEDC, as I think Jake just mentioned now. So in terms of 7 days, as I said, we'd be ahead with 60 days. The final point was that management would work with DWD longer term basis to get even better information about companies and the effects of what's happening. So that's a whole lot of a copy of everything we're trying to recommend. And I know this is an issue of interest, so.
The data that you would access through D, is that confidential at all, or are there limitations when they collect that from the parties providing it?
That's why this is a long-term solution, because all of that has to get worked out, and that's what the issue is right now with getting that. So DWD currently sets up separate terms of understanding, and they kind of do a bunch of different things, and so they're trying to get a data warehouse that doesn't have that confidential information in it, but yet can provide us with useful information that that other state agencies can use. So not just us, but other state agencies. As you can imagine, a lot of interest from other agencies within the state, workforce development throughout the state, in the information that's housed at DWD. And so that's why this is we're hoping to have something together by June. For this fiscal year is kind of our goal on that, but.
That's on the longer term.
That's the longer term
Yeah, yeah.
solution,
But
so.
the seventh, or the
Yep.
initial weekly review happens.
Which one are you talking about? So the weekly review doesn't have any confidential
Okay,
information on it.
I mean, any data that we use for this purpose, I just want to make sure that the people that provide it to whatever state agency comes into possession of it, that the people providing that have not put limitations, of we have to promise, and we, I mean, the state of Wisconsin hasn't promised confidentiality or some limitation on how it's used.
The Wisconsin Business Layoff is a database that's publicly accessible.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a notice that said that if you're the mayor, the county executive, whatever, if there's something in your area, that warrant system automatically required you to be.
The only special privilege that we're getting that anybody else couldn't have is that they're gonna get it to us the same day that they receive it, rather than it coming to them at the end of the week.
Jake, why don't you explain the problems we ran into with unemployment compensation?
Well,
And the
it's just-
confidentiality of that.
It's extremely confidential information. I mean, so that's what DWD has to work through, is how they can get information that's useful and not confidential into this database.
That would probably trigger many, many inquiries, but a huge privacy issue.
Yeah,
Right.
Representative?
Yeah, you make my point. I mean, that's exactly the point. You know, we shouldn't 20 more employees and go through all these other reports and try to find confidential information. And in fact, business people are used to this, because here's the SB. You know, I was there for nearly 5 years. I never come to me and say, well, I would apply except for the fact I have to certify this or certify that. I appreciate the work put forward by your committee. I understand bankers that, and their concern and all that, but I don't know if they fully appreciate and recognize what we're talking about here. We're talking about 6 months before anything can be done. We're talking about confidential information. We don't need to go track all this. If people want the privilege of getting taxpayer funds to help their business to go forward, the requirements are, you're not going to outsource, you're not going to, if you're going to lay off people, you're just going to notify us. That's all. It's not hard to do. It's simple. I owned a business, believe me, I knew off. If I was transferring somebody from in DC office to our South Africa office, it was very simple. I mean, and I just think we're overly complicating this. I felt at the last meeting we had a consensus, and appreciate the fact it sounds like you agreed to the first provision, which is credit reasonably available elsewhere. That's already on the SBA application. I think the language is perfect. Second point, I just think we're trying to come up with something that's complicated, it's cumbersome, it adds taxpayer cost to us to try and track from, Secretary Newsom's department to Secretary Chandler's department, the Unemployment Compensation Division. I mean, we don't need to. What we need to know is if in fact they've had a change, and I don't know, you're an employer yourself, you know if you have a change. I mean, it's not that complicated. You just have to notify us. Our staff, as part of their collections effort, which we spent a lot of time talking about here today, can at least reach out and find out. Now, maybe they can say, look, we did do that, but it has to do with the division. It has nothing to do with the money we got the loan for. Terrific. But maybe it doesn't. But at least that way we can ensure we're protecting the taxpayers' dollars. And so I feel very strongly about this. And it just seems to me we have a very streamlined, easy process. I don't think we're making it difficult for entrepreneurs at all. And I just would recommend that we go forward with our initial recommendation that the governor and I put forward together in good faith and adopt that.
Representative, would you mind sharing with the group, the rest of the board, that recommendation?
Yeah,
right
absolutely.
Now? Yeah, just, the key differences that you're looking for relative to what the committee recommended.
Yeah, I mean, we had some language that we had sent over. Now, the credit reasonably available elsewhere, I'll pass this around. But I think you're already okay with that. It sounds like you're all right with. The question was on the issue of, and here's the language that we have recommended. I'm not wedded to word for word, but I think that this case, but it's, we've got this. Oh, good, very good. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, just let me remind.
Yeah, let me pass it around here.
This is a
It's actually written.
This is a recommendation being made by the committee.
Yep.
That we all sit on committees, we know that.
Mhm.
The board is going to decide today what the board wants to do. So, absolutely, let's
Sure.
entertain, any discussion about that.
So the language that we put forward under number 2, for any project where WEDC offers financial assistance, will include language in the contract to ensure that WEDC receives up-to-date information on any potential job losses, specifically under the reporting section. It just states, and they just certify, the recipient will notify WEDC within days their extenuating circumstance, and we could just say 30 days for that matter. If people feel like that's a more reasonable time period, I'm certainly open. If any full-time positions in Wisconsin are reduced or relocated outside of the state. So it's very simple. Companies know if they've done that. All they have to do is part of the fact that the taxpayers entrusted them with resources that they worked hard to earn to give over to this company, that they just simply notify them. They can send an email. Whatever process Hannah can come up with, email or whatever, communication, so that we know that you're making us aware of it, so that therefore Jake's department, if all of a sudden we're at risk here, taxpayers are. That was the recommendation.
Yeah, I think from the committee's perspective, we absolutely wanted to make sure the taxpayers protected. I think we all agree on what the end result is. I think we're disagreeing on how to get there. I think one of the biggest concerns, and I don't know if this is what you intended, was the sense in the language was that a single employee is laid off at company X. They need to report that to WEDC within 7 days. So was that Amazon, loses an employee at the house, or they lay one off? Does that need to be reported within 7 days? And because I'm not seeing the complexity from our side. I see holes in our side, in what we're recommending, but I don't see the complexity because I think we're going straight to this one database, getting the report, not looking at unemployment compensation or any of this other stuff. I think that was the long-term stuff Jake was talking about. We're looking at one report that they're already getting and saying who's on there that matches our list. That's what we're recommending. So the undue burden, it seemed to us, was, okay, I have 10 people being laid off in a 500-person company. Do I need to report within 7 days? So is that your intent?
Time frame, we recommended 7, I'd be happy with 30 days, but they just send an email. Really often.
But it doesn't matter the number, employees, percentage, or, that was our biggest concern, Ray, I think, as we talked about.
I would say, the 7 days was an issue, first of all, and we've already heard that that's not an issue, that 30 days, and I think 30 days is much more workable.
Sure, I have no problem with that.
For a corporation. But the other thing was, already stated, is one person enough to trigger this on a large company? We don't want to be an undue burden. We can understand that, but we also need to know. I understand that too. Is there some gray area we can come to that it is what a % of your force? I don't know. Maybe it's a % of your workers. Maybe
the current measurements are, just for everybody's information, for the size of a business closing, it would be 25 or more employees in Wisconsin. The U.S., you mentioned the SBA, the federal law requires 50 or more employees. Wisconsin's tougher than the federal law on that. For a mass layoff, 25% or more of the workforce, or 25 employees, whichever is greater, and 500 employees or more automatically.
Sure.
The federal number is 33% and 500 or more employees. So Wisconsin's tougher than the federal government is on those right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a reasonable point.
Let me
I'm
just
sorry,
add one
Governor.
thing, because I'm actually going to side with you on this one.
Governor, by all means, you get the floor.
I think your concerns are legitimate. The distinction I would make on each of those is that that's something where somebody, whether they get public assistance or not, is by law required. Private sector company may not get a penny of public money, but they're closing down. The law says, even though it's your business, you have nothing to do with the government, the law says you got to give us 60 days or 25 days. Here, where I agree with Representative Bark on it, it's saying you don't have to take public money. You don't have to take, now, obviously we're hopeful that we can help. We're not the sole source, but we're part of a source of option. You're not forced to take whatever it is that the WDC or any other state agency can offer. And so if we're requiring anyway to take that an example, there's a lot of talk over the last few months on as to what happened with Plexus and whether or not they took public money and they outsourced jobs or sent them out of the country, and they didn't. They lost a customer that then they were qualified, their workers qualified for assistance because the customer they lost over or out of the country instead of Plexus sending them out. But they qualified because even without any of this right now, there's three basic things you have to do to get money from WDC. You've got to create jobs, you've got to retain jobs, and you've got to make capital investments. That's really what it boils down to. That's what WDC requires. In the past, in Commerce years ago, there are examples I can point to. You didn't have to do those things, and you still got money. We say right now, if you want to get assistance from us, you got to do, per what we've all talked about, you've got to either retain job or create jobs, retain jobs, or make a capital investment. Plexus got some money because they made a huge capital investment, but they now won't be eligible until they restore the jobs of the layoffs for those additional credits for new jobs created until they get back, and then they add jobs on top of that. Now, because we require them to report something. It isn't what you're proposing here on the layoff, make them do that. And so my point is, if you say I need assistance to add capital or to grow my company or to keep jobs and I want the taxpayers to help me out a little bit, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, make a change in those circumstances, which you understand changes are going to happen. We'd like to know, and then, your example of a couple employees maybe get a job at Amazon, I think they're big enough to be able to handle that. And a company, if they're not making us, one person, frankly, incentive not to lay them off because of the paperwork of having to report that. So either way, I honestly don't think it's a big problem. And if in return we can say with absolute certainty, not only are we each meeting those criteria of creating jobs, retaining jobs, or investing in capital, what we're saying when we do that, we know for sure who get our assistance aren't using it off employees or to send jobs outside the United States, or outside the state in particular, then I think we're okay. But anyway.
Yeah, let the minutes show it. But you know what, I think the 30-day, I think that seems reasonable. I think, people think in terms of months. And beyond that, though, I just want to second the proposal. I think that's, we should move forward.
One of the things we wrestled with this provision applied to communities that receive awards. The Idaho Sites program, we've got Main Street program, we've got brownfield grant programs, we have the export programs, business development, global business development, minority loan program, enterprise zones, connect communities. There's a lot of communities that receive these awards. If a city lays off an employee, would that, your intention that they would have to trigger no?
Is that part of their contract?
No.
Well, so it wouldn't affect their contract, right? I mean, like, let's say somebody that, you're either going to retain jobs, create jobs, or make a capital investment. So let's say somebody got a capital investment and it has nothing to do with jobs, then probably they wouldn't have to report anything because it's not, it's not a jobs-related type deal. So where part of it is that you're agreeing to retain whatever, 100 jobs and create 100 jobs, well, then it's a different story. So, I would
with that clarification, that makes it a lot easier for us to administer.
Our discussion too was that it didn't seem like it applied to all the grants that we're involved with. Or, it's only those which create jobs.
President, Lisa, let me that's that first line of on point 2. Jake, I'm not sure who did.
That's Representative Barca's suggestion was to.
Oh, okay. Well, that first line was to focus it on those awards that are tied directly to jobs.
Okay, no problem.
That was the point.
Well, I can see that, then. I'm certainly not over that.
I just, does it make sense, particularly for the larger employers, to make it a percentage of the jobs incentive under the contract? rather than requiring something, for 1, 2, 10 employees. If they're incented for 500 jobs, like in Amazon, is it 10%, is it 5%, what is that? So that it doesn't, there's a happy medium there in terms of the burden it puts on the employer.
On one hand, that's reasonable. On the other hand, my thought is the larger employer, the more likely they've got people in compliance anyway. That they'd be tracking this to do their report anyway. Because remember, the distinction on this I was trying to make is that they have to report on this anyway. It's just the timeliness that really is the only question. So if they're tracking this, because eventually to get the credits to justify that, they have to report back to us to justify why they've earned their credits, which is it's the basis of the reports we looked at before. There's a handful of accounts we've got left over in the past where they couldn't justify that, so the question is, how much do they owe us? My sense, I think you're right, but the flip side is, if you're in Amazon, you're gonna track that anyway.
So not to fast track anything or speed it up at all, but if the first memo that our committee sent to the Board Administration Committee, I think highlights exactly what we're talking about. And so that was the first proposal that our internal group had brought to the committee. And so that might.
They were trying to be reasonable.
Yeah. And we wanted to go a different way.
Yeah.
Well, the irony is, Governor, just so you know, your staff voted against their own proposals. So do you have a copy of that memo? You can
It's
share?
in your binders,
Okay,
actually. So
let's
we
take a
included
look.
both copies of the memo in there. So there's the, sure. Tab 7. So there's the revised
back
jobs
after the
reporting
contracts.
enhancements.
There we go, yeah.
And then right behind that was the original one from August 18th, that was the jobs reporting procedures and safeguards. So while it goes through a lot of the stuff that we already do, the last 2 paragraphs kind of highlight what the recommendation was originally.
Feedback.
Yep.
Is there an opportunity where the same type of triggers could be required for reporting to WEDC as do for DWD, or is that missing anything that the representative is trying to get?
Well, as the Governor indicated, I mean, the difference here is that for DWD, it's companies that aren't getting any taxpayer money.
Right, but I'm saying, they have to apply, but if they have to share that information with DWD, if they're also getting money from WEDC, then they would simply inform us.
So the threshold's
Same.
much higher.
Right,
Yeah,
that'd be my concern,
yeah,
right?
It's a lot higher,
Yeah.
so.
Right.
25% of the workforce.
Right.
You know, if
And
it was.
the representative's looking for any change.
Because see, again, the difference I envisioned when Representative Barker and I talked about this in Wauwatosa at the Briggs and Stratton meeting was that it is cumbersome if you're talking about just any company with any change. But again, when I go to go to a ribbon cutting or announcement or that, employers know. They know how much they've invested. They know what the ratio is. They know how many they've added. In fact, they usually all come and say, well, it's great, they said you invested X number of $1 million and you're adding 23, and they said, well, we've already hired 10 and we're going to be on our way. We're actually going to add 30, but I mean, they know. They know exactly. In fact, usually I don't just ask whoever's the owner, I ask the human resources person because they really know. They said, well, actually we're at 32 and we're hiring 3 more this week or whatever it might be. So, I mean, that's just from, I know it sounds anecdotal, but having gone to enough of these out there, to me, from the employers that we go and celebrate or announce with them, what I've found is they know, they're on top of it, they can tell you what's going on, and, the sense being that however this gets worded, if the simple sense is saying, all we're asking to say is, if we're going to give you assistance, tell us you're not going to use this money to lay people off, and you're not going to use this money to take the jobs out of the state. And if something happens, particularly more on the layoff than the outsourcing side, although it applies either way, that changes, then you got to let us know. So then we can question it. I mean, really, is that simply put?
Perfect.
So if I could make a recommendation then, and then maybe we can get it to some kind of a motion someplace if we're prepared, would be that to take the language from Representative Clark, add back the 4 which jobs are an expected outcome, switch it to the 30 days and instead of the 7 days, and the extenuating circumstances, please take that out. Is there, Jake, am I missing anything else on that?
No, I mean, the only change then from what's in that memo to this one is talking about reduced or relocated. So if we're looking for layoffs in addition to outsourcing, that would be Representative Barkas versus the outsourcing issue. So.
I think you captured it perfectly. I would second that motion.
One other question we wrestled with. If a company lays off a person on the 2nd of the month, another person on the 6th of the month, so the net is the same, do they still report?
No, I think if the net's the same, I mean, because it may be a qualification issue, there may be other. Yeah, I mean, my sense, if you wanted to, you know, as a part of your rulemaking process or whatever, have some sort of provision there, because the idea is a net layoff a number of people.
Total job is obligated to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
That'll be less burdensome for
Sure.
the company.
Right.
This would be prospective as opposed to, there's no way to do it retrospectively.
Right, no, prospective, yeah,
Yeah.
you can't go backwards. You know, because it's as they sign their loan application or.
I'm saying we agree to this.
I did. Did somebody? Oh, okay. The other thought I had is would that have reporting requirements, sounds like the answer is no, have had any effect on any of us bringing the companies into Wisconsin? Any of the successes that we've had? Would we have, they looked at that and said, geez, you know, boy, South Carolina doesn't want this. And I'm not racing to the bottom, believe me, I don't want to do that, but any sense?
It's something we always, have to look at. It's just like your incentives need to be competitive, your regulatory environment needs to be competitive too. And so I can't think of one that would have said no necessarily. It's impossible, no.
Because again, the kicker with this, I go back to that Plexus example, do one of those things. So the job numbers goes down, I mean, this is just adding in more timeliness, but eventually it catches up on the reporting in the sense that even though Plexus wasn't outsourcing, because they reduced their numbers, an example, they're not eligible until they restore that number of employees and then build off of that. So in the long haul, this just gives us a more timely way to be on top of all that. And what it says is on the way, and you're making a commitment that if you want the assistance, that's what the only other concern would be if companies that are global, but they just know if they're gonna come to Wisconsin, the help they're gonna get is gonna be here. They can create jobs anywhere else, as long as they don't take them from the amount that they have in the state of Wisconsin.
I mean, I can't imagine Jim Hawkins over at Kennel would have said, wait, now I saw this only a provision that really gives me pause.
Right, guys like him, the big thing was manufacturing production tax credit.
Right.
He said, hey, this is long-term, this is gonna be good for us here. Yep, Tom?
First of all, I agree, it's, the way things are done now is self-enforcing. It takes care of itself, and they won't even get access to the funds if they haven't met the requirements, which would, wouldn't happen if there was a net decrease or they didn't meet the numbers. In terms of being competitive and whether this would inhibit opportunities, do other states have requirements like this?
Some do, yeah.
Okay, so we wouldn't be the only state requiring this sort of certification or, okay.
Well, and certainly any SBA borrower has, theirs is much more expensive, you can see all the various.
But on a competitive basis with other states, we don't want to put ourselves at a severe disadvantage if we're the only ones.
States running,
So there's two motions we have to focus on, so do you want to manage that, Governor? Or do you want
We're on right now, because we've got another part before, but we jump right to this part, which is good, because it's harder. So we've got, which is really the second thing on your list there, the vote on job reporting requirements recommendation.
Correct.
That's what you talked about, and then you talked about the committee recommended, Representative Barker, you got your suggestion here. And the recommendation from Paul is the slight modifications, so that it says full programs in which jobs are expected, an expected outcome, take off this part that was underlined,
Mhm.
then go and do, strike 7 business days, include 30, and take off the, if there are circumstances.
Mhm.
And then
Yep.
we have, with those slight modifications, what you recommend. So, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think one is getting net full-time positions, just to capture that circumstance where there is.
The language in the second part similar to what it's in the third point?
Yes, so it would read, so the language that we'd be required to include in would be the recipient will notify WDC within 30 days if any net full-time positions in Wisconsin are reduced or relocated out of Wisconsin.
Is that okay? Okay. So, without any opposition, that's.
Wait, let me,
Oh, go ahead.
on second thought, you know, I just thought about that. The only concern I have with that is, you know, as Reed described, I agree with him completely that, you know, if you're substituting one position for another. And the only concern I'd have with putting it in here versus, let's say, as part of your operating degree, clarify for people, is if someone were to move, let's say, for instance, you had a company that has, and they're moving a whole division of 20 people in China, but, you know, so they take advantage, but at the same time, they're adding a completely separate division, having nothing to do with what we're dealing with here. So the net jobs are the same, they still ended up out. You know, so by putting net jobs before both of those provisions, it's a wording factor, and you're gonna have to reword this probably anyway in the final loan app, and you can bring it back to us. But that'd be my only concern. I'd like to make sure we're reflected, is that on the outsourcing side, we wanna make sure that we're notified anytime there's some change here. Where on the layoff side, you're laying off 2 people, but you're adding 2 people. I think that's an entirely different situation. So I have no, you know, the net side, I think on the job layoffs, they're 2 different distinct situations.
What if you inserted something after Wisconsin, and then the point 2, if any net full-time positions in Wisconsin related to the project funded are reduced or relocated out of Wisconsin, would that achieve it? Then you couldn't cross over.
Is you just take, I mean, that last part of that sentence, you make that into two sections, same thing repeated 2 different times, but the net only applies to the reduced, not to the relocated.
I think that's good.
2 clauses.
Yeah. That'd be I would prefer that personally. Yeah.
Reduction of full-time positions in Wisconsin are reduced, or if any full-time positions are relocated outside of the state of Wisconsin. So you repeat the
Good.
same thing, but you only apply the net to the
I think that's
reduction,
perfect.
not to the relocation.
Good.
So without opposition, that's the motion.
What time is it?
I'll make that motion.
So the motion offered by Representative Barker, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Those opposed, the same. The motion carries. So that's always what this in our.
Right, and that was Representative Bark had discussed the SBA language, which was a checkbox that you assert that you couldn't get the funds from anywhere else, I think.
Okay.
And then we had suggested that that be a fill-in-the-blank justification for why these funds are needed. And that the idea was we would get better that way, as opposed to just a yes or a no check.
And then Hannah, do we need a separate vote on that?
Yes.
Okay. So is there a motion? You recommended it, so it's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss that. I actually think that's a mistake, because I think that, you know, the irony is you're actually making it more complicated for entrepreneurs to write this. Where a checkbox, I mean, the SBA, you know, and obviously we'd have to have it tailored to us, we're not loans, but, you know, the lender is assessed the borrower's access to credit outside the SBA guaranteed loan, determine that such credit is not available elsewhere on reasonable terms from its non-federal sources. The lender's loan file contains documentation that specifically identifies the factors in the present financing that meet the credit elsewhere test. I mean, to me, that's very simple. All I have to do is just check yes, that, you know, I mean, that credit I mean, know that credit is not reasonably available elsewhere. And I think, I don't know about your bankers in your commission, I think they'd love it, because they want to make sure that they've at least checked with the banker, and if it was available through that bank, that they went to the bank instead of coming to us. As taxpayers, we're not there to compete with, we're just there to make sure that if they can't get this credit elsewhere, or couldn't do the project without the WEDC funds, that they're gonna do it. So it just seems to me that this is about as simple as you could possibly make it, and where versus writing an essay as to why you need these funds, and for a lender, that doesn't get at all. And for the taxpayers, or people that question if we're giving out money that people really don't need, then they have that assurance that in fact, no, we're not. We're giving out money that, like what Lisa said earlier, in the meeting, when we were talking about the fact that these are funds that by their nature are a little bit riskier. I mean, because obviously they can't get them through a private institution. And so it just seems to me that along, even in terms of the either loan application or the credit application, where they're getting that credit, as opposed to having something you gotta fill out, now we just have two boxes that we're adding. They just check, those two boxes and they're done.
I would go back, so in the situation with Amazon certified that they were unable to obtain financing from banks
That's my concern.
Well, I think they'd say that the project wouldn't have gone forward, right? Not that because in this case, it's not strictly a borrowing issue, right? I mean, but they're saying that the project, the incentive, the project could not have gone forward with the incentive that was provided to them. Maybe you see in Wisconsin, that might be another way to deal with it, but we want to make sure.
So would the checkout box, how would the language be on that then?
That, take Amazon, which is a
Wouldn't
perfect
reasonably go
example.
forward without,
Yeah, would not have been able to reasonably go forward in this, in the state of Wisconsin, were it not for the WEDC financial assistance or WEDC product that they're providing.
I'm always concerned with the checkbox, because you don't have the opportunity, if you check the box, you're saying all of this applies.
Mhm.
Right. The narrative box obviously gives, we could ask for different or more information in the narrative, including, so, it, but explain how this project would go forward without WEDC's assistance. And if they can't come up with an answer, I mean, then you get
an option, like,
but we think it's still, it gives you the flexibility to get a case-by-case basis to be the but-for type situation that's called for with the language.
because because this is gonna go on an application to begin with, so to help, I'm just trying to think also, how do you help the process of the team looking at that, and something like that might help, because we're trying to get people to think about is, why are you coming to us? And if you had that, and I like your point on the check, it'll make it easier, but if they want to help, if I was somebody applying for it, I'd not only check that off, I'd say, I went and checked on this, and, they said, we can help you a part of it, but there's no way we can do because a lot of these, it's not a question of if they get financing or not, it's a question of filling in the gap. We're usually like the little bridge that finishes the deal off.
That's right.
And that would be their argument to say, yeah, I've looked and 2 or 3 lenders can get us this far, but for guys. And then, but if you had that option, because your point, make it easy, say, have the check off and then explore.
Or explain, like either check this box or explain
Yeah.
I would say
in more detail.
I would say check it and explain.
There's two pointer. Amazon was the first one the example I would give, but it sounds like we feel comfortable maybe that the language you're suggesting may cover that. The other one is at the other end of the spectrum. So I'll give you I'll put my tech hat here. It comes in. Is there money available? Yeah, there's venture capital involved. Just go as much as you want, right? But in Madison, it's a lot tougher. So I can't honestly check that box and say, no, there is not money available. I can Wisconsin and go to.
Right, but I think to the point.
Oh, okay, but if you put Wisconsin.
But you say Wisconsin,
that
because the
could work
kicker
for-
here is that it's happening here, not that because same thing would apply in the big one with Amazon, because I can go Texas.
Yeah.
And they'll do it, but to get it here, and that's where I think it's got to reasonable and in Wisconsin have to be a part of it. Because you tie those two together, because otherwise you're asking somebody to say, well, I suppose in a 1 in a million shot, maybe I could, hit the lottery and win this, but you're saying a reasonable person standard, and that it's gotta be in Wisconsin.
That's good, and I think maybe if we take that analogy, don't worry, do that, or you can offer an explanation if there's some extenuating circumstances, or staff.
Yeah.
So if I can, from an underwriting standpoint, we really want the free-flowing box in underwriting. A checked box doesn't really do it. Underwriting, if they check the box and say that they need the money, that's the end of it then. We'd like to know what their need is, and so in all scenarios, whether they're checking yes, no, or anything else, we really want them to fill out a box that tells them exactly their need is. Because the checkbox was bringing up more questions than it was solutions. They're looking at the checkbox and some of what Paul was saying, well, I don't know what this means, can you explain it to me more? Maybe they don't need the money to move the project forward, but it's gonna take 20 years to get it done in the state of Wisconsin versus if they can get our help, they can get it done in 3. Maybe they don't need it to do the full project, but they need it to do part of the project. Maybe they don't need the money to do the project, but they need the money to provide training to their employees. And so giving them the ability to explain what their need is so much more helpful to us than just having them check a box that says yes, because that doesn't tell us anything.
Well, how about it, then they check the box and they explain.
That's fine. But they have to fill the box no matter what. I don't care if they check the box.
And are we burdening businesses?
And lengthening our
Burdening the business more,
Well,
having them explain what the need is.
or I mean, basically, whether it's a checkoff or it's the explanation for the box itself is to say, justify to us why you need this assistance to do this in Wisconsin. Essentially, it's getting at what you're checking off, is saying, you have to, in a narrative sense, justify to us why it is you'd be checking that box anyway. So whether it's a check off on a box or it's just the box, either way, the description's gotta be, what you fill in better be explaining to us why you can't do this any other way to do it in Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
So where do we end up?
We've got both.
Well, as long, I mean, from that standpoint, if you check off and say, check it off, that's what the explanation, and then say, then explain why. That's what, I think what you're recommending there.
And we have to insert the Wisconsin.
Right.
So there's, the language in the 822, title determining applicant need. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Jake, but it sounds like the language that would be checked off is check that it would have to be something, to agree that I agree or I certify that incentive assistance is needed to ensure this project will happen in Wisconsin.
So,
Yes, the last sentence in the second paragraph could be changed into a checkbox, basically. Because I think that captures some of the concerns that were raised.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Last sentence would be,
Right.
I certify that incentive assistance, I don't know why I can't say that word, I certify that
Sure.
incentive assistance is needed will happen in Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's what you're getting at, right?
Is that, Jake, is that?
Very good.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor.
So the motion, if everybody's okay with that being the motion, the language included, had a motion and a second on that. Any more discussion?
just one question. So we'd have a checkbox and there'd be a room for a narrative explanation.
Two
I
together.
get the graphics.
That's right. No other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the same. Motion carries. Okay. We're done with that report. Okay, next on our agenda, we're going to go into closed session.
I know people are disappointed that there were no policies to approve.
Yeah.
The only reason Dan felt comfortable leaving.
That's right, you didn't have any policy. So if there's a motion to go into closed meeting per the statutory reference mentioned there, motion, and there's a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the same. I'll give everybody a second to get out, and I'll use the restroom for a minute.